Hello there. Welcome to Moody Institute of Science. We're going to explore several different realms of God's creation. Before we're finished, I think you'll agree that our God is a wonderful God. The psalmist said, "The heavens declare the glory of God, and the firmament showeth his handiwork." So let's begin with astronomy. We think of the stars as little points of light that we see only at night. But our sun is a star. To us, it doesn't look like the other stars in the sky, but that's just because we're so much closer to it than to any of the others. The reason our Earth is so close to the sun is that it's one of the sun's family. That is, one of the 9 planets that revolve around the sun and make up what we call the solar system. But that sun, just how large is it? Well, if it were hollow, you could drop more than 1 million spheres the size of our Earth down inside and rattle them around. But the sun is about 1,500,000 times larger than our Earth. Away out there in the heavens are other stars so much larger that they make our sun but a speck in comparison. How far away are they? Well, let's take a trip from our sun just to that nearest star out there in space. To make the journey, we'll travel at the speed of light, 186,000 miles per second. Let's say that we begin our journey on January 1st. At exactly 12 o'clock noon, we leave the sun and hurtle into space at this inconceivable speed. In 8 minutes and 19 seconds, we have passed the orbits of Mercury and Venus and have spanned the 93 million miles that separate the Earth from the sun. We continue on, passing Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, Neptune, and at 5:31, we reach Pluto, the last sentinel outpost of our solar system. And remember, we have traveled 3,675,000,000 miles, and it's still January 1st. But wait a minute. Our journey was to the nearest star, not to the limits of the solar system. We haven't even started our trip yet, for we must continue to travel as the days, the weeks, and the months pass. Finally, a whole year goes by. Then 2 years. 3. 4 years. Then finally, on April 19th of the 5th year, we reach Alpha Centauri, that nearest star out there in space. But our telescopes don't stop here. Their searching eyes have probed the depths of space hundreds, thousands, millions, yes, hundreds of millions of light years, and still there are stars beyond. Not many years ago, astronomers were unable to conceive of anything beyond our own Milky Way system. To them, this was the universe. Then a new discovery rocked the astronomical world to its foundations. For years, telescopes had revealed hazy objects called nebulae, distributed throughout all the heavens. Some of these, such as the Flame Nebula in the constellation of Orion, and this spectacular filamentous nebula in Cygnus, were known to be composed of luminous gas. Many had a definite spiral shape, thought then to be great whirlpools of luminous gas in the process of forming into a star. However, an intense study was begun of the great spiral nebula in Andromeda. Bringing to bear the superb resolving power of the 100-inch telescope, this nebula was found to be made up of individual stars and was, in reality, another galaxy. It was this discovery that pushed back the boundaries of our knowledge and expanded enormously our concept of the material universe. This new knowledge enabled us to understand the structure of our own galaxy, and at last we had an explanation for the Milky Way. Our galactic system is very similar to the Andromeda galaxy. Seen from the edge, it would appear something like this. The Milky Way is merely our view of our own galaxy. But ours is just one galaxy. Everywhere we look out in space, there are others. How many stars are there? Astronomers tell us that there are at least 100 billion stars in our galaxy. there are 100 million of these galaxies in known space. And known space is just 1 billionth of theoretical space. So, if we would number the stars, we must multiply 100 billion times 100 million times 1,000 million. This equals 10 to the 28th power, or 10 octillion stars. The human mind cannot grasp the meaning of such a number, but maybe this will help. Think for a moment how many grains of sand there are. Sir James Jeans tells us the total number of the stars in the universe is probably something like the total number of the grains of sand on all the seashores of all the world. Do you feel pretty small? Well, I guess that's the natural reaction. After looking at the immensity of God's universe, man seems just too small and insignificant for God to care anything about. But there are other things to consider. For example, God says, "Consider the lilies of the field, how they grow. They toil not, neither do they spin. And yet I say unto you that even Solomon in all his glory was not arrayed like one of these." Poppies are the field lilies of California. Each year in the spring, they stretch a carpet of gold across the valley. This world of ours may be small, but everywhere about us we see beauty and care lavished upon it. The poppy is a friendly flower. It seems at home beneath snow-capped mountains, in the farmer's fields, or along the highway. Remember our verse, "Consider the lilies of the field, how they grow"? Well, let's consider how they grow. We'll start the time compressor and squeeze 4 full days and nights into less than half a minute. On the morning of the first day, the poppies pop open, and late in the afternoon they close. The next morning they open again. At night they close. You see, 2 full days have gone by. The third morning they open, and at night they close. Then the fourth morning they struggle open, wither, and die. There are many wonderful things happening about us each day that we miss simply because they happen too slowly for us to see. It's not only beauty we miss. Many of the most vital secrets of life remain hidden until the lapse time camera lays them bare. We might think it's the wind blowing the leaves of the daffodil back and forth, but these pictures were taken in the laboratory and there's no wind there. The leaves, you see, grow first on one side and then on the other, giving them this swaying motion. There's a lot of force involved in the growing of living things. The struggle of this azalea bud to open is an example of it. Of course, it's not so evident here, but it's the same kind of force that enables growing roots to lift a sidewalk or crack the foundations of a house. Each flower has its own special tempo of growth as it unfolds. The begonia, for example, is so active that it's almost impossible to keep the camera focused upon it. The fuchsia is a favorite with gardeners everywhere. But how many of them realize that it grows like it had a bad case of hiccups? Flowers are as different as human beings. The hibiscus seems to have quite a sense of the dramatic as it unfurls with a grand gesture in a riot of color. There's an old-fashioned grace about the cyclamen. It seems to recall the courtly manner of yesterday as it opens with a curtsy. Plants don't grow all the time. They grow a while and then they rest. In this rose, for example, there's a period of growth, then a period of rest, then a period of growth, then a period of rest. Our attention has been focused upon the beauty of the plant. But there's something far more vital than beauty. For plants manufactured directly or indirectly, every bit of food that we eat. As the leaves are exposed to sunlight, the mysterious and wonderful process of photosynthesis carries on. This process is perhaps the most basic and vital in all the world. Without these marvelous food factories, life could not exist upon the earth. But let's look down inside the minute cells of the leaf and see this factory actually in operation. It takes a powerful microscope to study this life-sustaining function. A tiny section of a leaf is placed on the stage of the microscope. And then we look down inside these cells and see the chlorophyll grains, or chloroplasts, marching endlessly round and round inside the cells. Through the action of sunlight, this photosynthetic process takes the carbon from the carbon dioxide of the air and the hydrogen from the water of the ground, mixing them together into carbohydrates, proteins, and other food elements in a way which man has never quite been able to understand and may never be able to duplicate. Photosynthesis certainly is vital to us, but there wouldn't be any photosynthesis. There would be neither food nor life upon this earth if it weren't for pollination. With the reawakening of life in the spring, the landscape is splashed with riotous color. But this beauty isn't just for our pleasure. Something more vital is involved. The purpose of the color is to attract insects, and to add to this eye appeal, there's a bit of nectar, sweet to the insect's taste. But let's see why the flower needs the insect. The anther, located at the end of those hair-like filaments, produces the pollen. These tiny yellow grains have to be transported to the stigmatic surface of a nearby blossom. Without this process, we would have blossoms, but no fruit on our trees. No fruit means no seeds, and in time, no more trees. The insect crawls over the flower in search of nectar, and minute hairs on his legs and body pick up the pollen grains. Thus they are transported to the sticky stigmatic surface of a neighboring flower. Here, these minute pollen grains germinate. The photomicrographic lapse time camera permits us to actually witness this thrilling process of germination. Certain insects play an important part in this basic process. But I'm afraid most of us would be rather glad to get rid of the ones we find in our garden. We complain plenty about these pesky fellows with their seemingly endless appetites. Let's examine the life history of one caterpillar, the anise swallowtail. As the days of the caterpillar's existence as a larva draw to a close, he begins an amazing series of preparations for the next event of his life. The spinning of this silken loop is an important step in that process. After anchoring the ends of the silk thread in just the right spot, he weaves strand after strand until it forms a strong cord. When it is finished, he performs a very neat bit of gymnastics and ducks his head through the loop. As soon as the loop is just where he wants it, he hangs quietly for a couple of days. During this period, the pseudopods, feet-like organs along the undersurface of his body, mysteriously disappear. After the interval of quiet, the caterpillar's body convulses violently. Then begins a series of rhythmic muscular contractions. All of us know that the caterpillar turns into a chrysalis, then into a butterfly, but few people actually witness the transformation. This is not lapse time photography. This is the actual speed at which the change occurs. During these few moments, he is shedding his skin, his feet, and all the external features of the caterpillar to emerge into a mysterious phase of life called the chrysalis. In just a moment, we'll delve into the mysteries of this change in color. But first, let's retrace our steps briefly. Before the caterpillar loses his skin, holding onto the twig is comparatively simple. But when he sheds this skin, he performs an acrobatic feat that makes the man on the flying trapeze look like an amateur. First, he hangs onto the skin by pinching it between the folds of his body. Next, he withdraws what the entomologist terms the cremaster and neatly hooks it onto the branch. It looks as though he might shake himself loose as he struggles violently to rid himself of the rolled-up skin. But we don't need to worry about this. He has fastened himself in a way that will support more than 100 times his own weight. Key to this support is the cremaster, unique organ at the extreme lower tip of his body. It's actually no larger than the head of a pin, yet the microscope reveals it is covered with 140 tiny sharp hooks, just the equipment he needs. But the hooks are just half the story. Several days earlier, the caterpillar had the foresight to spin this strong, almost invisible web of silk on the branch. And it is this web that holds the hooks of the cremaster secure. Can you spot the chrysalis in this picture? Pretty well hidden, wasn't it? This blending of the colors into the background is no accident. It is deliberate camouflage. Caterpillars forming these chrysalids were all of the same type, the Anas swallowtail. Fed the same food, raised under identical conditions, there was just one difference. They were placed on different colored sticks just before entering the chrysalis stage. The emerging chrysalis does not immediately bear any resemblance to his environment. At first, it is greenish-white in color. Almost immediately, however, there is a striking change in color that agrees perfectly with the surroundings. This camouflage is the only protection the helpless insect has during the 2 weeks or so it hangs quietly, awaiting its day of liberation. When this day arrives, the insect jerks violently for a few moments, and then the chrysalis pops open, and from it emerges an adult insect, the butterfly. Of course, he still doesn't look much like a butterfly because his wings have not yet filled out. But this process won't take long. If you watch very closely, you'll see it actually take place. Tiny tubes within the wings are being filled, some with blood, some with air, and some with a liquid that will soon cement, giving rigidity and strength to the butterfly's wings. And so the caterpillar pays his debt to society. He was an awful nuisance in that garden. But as a butterfly, he not only adorns the world with his beauty, but performs the vital function of carrying pollen from flower to flower. The paramecium has been the biologist's classic example of simplicity. It is a tiny one-celled microorganism which careful study has revealed possesses a tremendous life potentiality. Some forms, under ideal conditions, reproduce every 3 hours. Fortunately for us, this process doesn't continue without interruption, and the didinium is one reason it doesn't. These little fellows eat paramecia. Though much smaller than their victims, they actually swallow them whole. Each didinium will eat at least 6 whole paramecia every day. But what would happen if the reproduction of one paramecium went on unhindered? If this process could continue for just 5 years, we would have enough paramecia to solidly pack all known space. For many years, we have been told that paramecia are so simple that they are all of one sex, and that they reproduce merely by dividing and becoming 2. But a new discovery has burst like an atomic bomb in the biological world. These tiny creatures that were supposed to be so simple have been found in some ways more complex even than man himself. These are paramecium bursaria. Their green color is the result of an amazing method of actually labeling the tiny organisms. Present within the paramecia is a microscopic form of algae, which varies from light to dark green in proportion to the amount of light allowed to accompany growth. Using a tiny glass tube called a micropipette, about the diameter of a human hair, paramecia of one sex are injected into a culture of a different sex. Soon, after the cultures are mixed, the animals assemble into small groups. Others then join these groups until sometimes 50 or more are clumped together. After a time, however, these groups break up into pairs according to a definite and predictable pattern. In most forms of life, there are but 2 sexes. Paramecia, however, are multisexual. More than a score of different sexes are known among them. In the search for simplicity, the scientist has discovered an overwhelming complexity. Just a drop of water? No. A complex world just as full of wonders as the whirling galaxies of distant space. Well, these are strange and wonderful things, aren't they? What do they mean to you personally? This is an important question. Many times these days we hear the statement, it isn't what you know, it's who you know that counts. The statement is made cynically, of course, but there's a real sense in which it is very true. For the man who does not know God is living an empty life. A God who can create 100 billion universes and then hurl them into space and fill them with all the minute miracles of life is a wonderful God. What is your relationship to him? Is this wonderful God a total stranger? If so, then your life is empty and pointless, even though it be filled with all the knowledge and the wisdom of this world. Some people go through life with God as a constant companion, as a partner in every adventure. Have you wondered about the reality of this relationship? Well, the answer to that question is personal experience. And after all, isn't that the best answer? How can we enter into this relationship with God? By turning over a new leaf, deciding to do better? I doubt if your experience with this formula is any more successful than mine. We need a new life, not a new leaf. We're apt to think of God's work in creation as something connected only with the dim and distant past. But God's work as creator is not over. He stands ready today to perform for you his greatest creative miracle. Let me read you a verse from the Bible. Therefore, if any man be in Christ Jesus, he is a new creation. Old things are passed away, and behold, all things are become new. God offers to create in us a new life, a life of peace instead of turmoil, a life of victory instead of sin and defeat, and a life of eternal glory instead of eternal suffering. And he's great enough to do the job if we'll only let him. The terms of this transaction between a human soul and the creator of the universe are not a matter of opinion, either yours or mine. They are clearly stated by God himself in the Bible, and it is enormously important that you and I know just what those terms are. May I make a suggestion? Get your Bible and read the 3rd chapter of John's Gospel. That's the Gospel of John, the 3rd chapter. It will take you just 3 minutes, and it could well be the most important 3 minutes in your whole life. We live in a wonderful world, a world crowded with beauty, a world of grandeur, mystery. Yes, this is a wonderful world, but perhaps the greatest wonder of all is man himself. His body is a marvel of mechanical efficiency and adaptability. The body has a chemical plant, far more complex and efficient than any man has ever built. It transforms the food we eat into flesh and blood and bones and teeth. And the body has a heating system, a living furnace that we stoke daily with food for fuel. As this fuel is oxidized, heat and energy are provided for the body machine. In winter, we're kept warm by this remarkable system, and in the summer, we're kept cool by the body's own cooling system, which is so efficient it can prevent our body temperature from rising for a limited time, even in heat that will fry a steak. An automatic thermostat controls both our heating and our cooling systems, keeping our temperature at a normal 98.6 degrees except when a higher temperature is needed to combat disease. More than the greatest ever constructed by man. The body's telephone system transmits millions of messages every day with never a busy signal or wrong number. Man-made machines require lubrication from an outside source, but the body manufactures its own lubricant in just the right grade and the right amount for every part. Yes, the body is wonderful. The hand, for example, is a marvel of mechanical adaptability. It can perform a multitude of tasks. Oh, man has been able to make a mechanical hand that will feed a printing press, but that hand can't thread a needle, or perform an operation, or paint a picture. The human hand can perform all these activities and thousands more. There's no doubt but what man needed a hand just like this. But was the need alone enough to bring it into existence? Still more wonderful is the human eye. The camera, man's nearest mechanical approach to the eye, resembles it in many ways. For any camera, whether it's a tiny model small enough to fit into your vest pocket, or a giant aerial camera, has a lens, similar in design and function to the lens of the human eye. Sometimes the eye lens becomes damaged or clouded and requires surgery. And here, in an actual operation, the eye lens is removed, and we see what a perfect little optical instrument it is. The eye functions far more efficiently than the lens of the most expensive camera. When a lens is focused on an object at a given distance and that distance is changed, the object becomes blurred, and the lens must be refocused to the new distance. In the camera, this focusing must be done by hand, but in the eye, it's automatic. Strong muscles change the focus thousands of times each day without a thought on our part. The camera also has a means for controlling the amount of light that reaches the film. An iris diaphragm, copied from and named after the iris of the human eye, which automatically changes according to light. Now, the pictures the eye gives us are not black and white. They're color pictures. And they're not stills. They're motion pictures. And they're not silent. They're sound pictures. Do you know that the music you're hearing is being played all over again on a perfect little musical instrument inside your ear? We think of the sound as being produced by the piano. And of course, in one sense, it is. But actually, the piano is as silent as a tomb and is merely producing vibrations in the air. As the keys are struck, felt hammers strike the strings, causing them to vibrate, each at its own frequency. The vibrating strings set the air pulsating to the same frequencies. These pulsations are transmitted to the outer ear, down the auditory canal, and through the mechanical linkage of the middle ear to the cochlea, which is all rolled up like a cockle shell. If the cochlea could be stretched out, we would discover a musical instrument similar to the piano, but far more wonderful and complex. The ear has more than 24,000 strings. These two notes are as close as any the piano can produce. But the ear's piano can produce 10 tones between these two and more than 1,500 different tones altogether. When the piano was played, the ear's remarkable little keyboard plays the same tones and sends corresponding signals along individual lines to the brain. Of course, the outer ear operates in air, but the cochlea is filled with a liquid. The transmission of sound from air to a liquid is one of the most difficult problems, but in the ear, this problem is beautifully solved by the mechanical preciseness of the middle ear, with its 2 diaphragms of just the right size, and 3 connecting bones with the exact leverage required. The eardrum is like a piston. It has an area of 90 square millimeters. The smaller diaphragm an area of 3.2 square millimeters. Diaphragms must be joined by a mechanical leverage of 2 to 1. In the ear, these tiny bones, the ossicles, are exactly right for the job. They are a fixed size that must not change from the cradle to the grave. The little fellow has a lot of growing to do before he's as big as Dad. All the bones in his body must grow and develop. All, that is, but the ossicles of his ears. They have to be the right size at the start and never change throughout life. These are the actual bones from the ear of an adult and a child. Can it be just an accident that they are the only bones in a baby's body that do not grow, that are fully developed at birth? The ear is one of the most efficient sound detectors known to man, capable of hearing the roar of a cannon, or the rustle of leaves, and under ideal conditions, even the footfalls of a cat. But at the University of California at Los Angeles, there is a place where we can hear sounds so soft that the footfalls of a cat would seem deafening by comparison. Deep in the sub-basement of the physics building, far below the surface of the earth, is a most unusual room where it is possible to study the amazing sensitivity of the human ear. Here we find ourselves shut off from extraneous outside noises, surrounded by prisms of spun glass that absorb incidental sounds such as our own breathing. It takes time for our senses to become adjusted to the absence of familiar sounds in this strange environment. But before long, we hear noises we never really heard before. The sound of air molecules beating against our eardrums. The sound of our heart pounding against our ribs. Did you ever see a living, beating human heart? A rare operation enables us to see this marvelous little pump. It pumps 12 pints of blood through hundreds of thousands of miles of blood vessels every minute, and in one day pumps enough blood to fill a large gasoline truck to overflowing. During a lifespan, it would fill a string of tank cars 50 miles long and beat 2,500 million times without a single shutdown for repairs. Have you ever wondered what goes on in the brain of a homing pigeon? Somewhere within its tiny head is locked a secret no man has ever solved. A secret that enables it to take to the air long distances from home, circle about a few minutes and get its bearings in some mysterious way, and then fly straight home over long miles of unfamiliar territory. Because of the pigeon's strange homing ability, pigeon raising has become a popular hobby. This hand-fed youngster doesn't look much like the expert flyer he will someday be. And yet, even at this early age, he's banded with a number that will identify him through racing days. As soon as the young are able to fly, they are released from the home loft on daily training flight. Like athletes, they must build up their speed and endurance through many weeks of strenuous training. The training flights are short at first, with the birds circling about overhead only a few minutes and then returning to the landing porch. But as they grow older and stronger, they're ready for longer flights and are transported many miles from the home loft. Here they are released to wing their way home over a path they have never seen. Then, at last, the 500-mile race. The birds are watered just before dawn to sustain them on their long journey home. And at sunrise, Pigeondom's greatest race classic gets underway as thousands of experienced flyers take to the air. No one ever taught these birds the way home. No one ever showed them the path they should take. And yet so unerringly do they wing their way across hundreds of unfamiliar miles that the time of their arrival home can be predicted almost exactly. But pigeons are small-time operators compared with the Pacific golden plover, a bird rarely seen outside of our field museums. This feathered globetrotter flies so far it needs 2 suits of clothes, one for Arctic weather and the other for tropical wear. It lives and mates in eastern Siberia and Alaska, but it winters in the Hawaiian Islands. In late summer, the adult birds make the long migration journey, traveling 2,000 miles over open sea. Without stopping for food or rest, they fly unerringly to these pinpoint islands in the vast Pacific. Junior's left at home because he's too young to make the trip. But many weeks later, as soon as he's able to fly, he too feels the urge to migrate, and he sets out for a goal he has never seen. To reach it, he must fly 2,000 miles over an unmarked... They've never made the trip before either. But what prompts the golden plover to set out for a place he has never seen? Just think what would happen if navigation were off and he missed those tiny islands. The migration flight of the American plover is even more amazing. It travels from northern Canada to Labrador and then across 2,000 miles of pathless seas without a stop and on down to Argentina. The journey home is by a different route, and again the young, making the trip for the first time, fly these thousands of miles unaccompanied by any bird that has ever made the trip before. But the greatest migrant of all is the Arctic tern. Starting from within 8 degrees of the North Pole, it spans more than 11,000 miles in a record-breaking flight to the South Pole. After a brief period within the Antarctic Circle, it makes the long return trip to complete the world's longest migration flight, 22,000 miles over unfamiliar land and sea. To keep a modern plane on its course requires an array of complicated instruments, charts, plotters, and celestial navigation equipment.
Long Beach, clear, scattered clouds at 3,500, visibility 8, temperature 60, dew point 48, altimeter 2988, winds west-southwest 13.
Clover Tower, this is NC 275. Landing instructions, please. Over.
NC 275, this is Clover Tower, runway 30, cleared to land.
Clover Tower, NC 275, turning final. What is it in this tiny head that all the ingenuity of man cannot duplicate? Say, what's this? Something out of a nightmare? Could be if you dream of bats. The bat is a mysterious creature, the only mammal that flies. Like other mammals, it bears its young alive and suckles them at its breast. This is typical bat country. Only a bat could feel at home here, but rents are reasonable and bat apartments easy to find. That is, for bats they are. But scientists spend long hours searching for the bat hideouts. And the main object of their interest, the bat's remarkable abilities in flight. At dusk, final preparations are made for technical studies at the spots where the bats have been located. As the bats emerge in search of food, important information for future analysis is obtained. And then our official bat catcher swings into action, in order that some of the bats may be taken to the laboratory for closer study. At the Moody Institute of Science, the bats quickly become adjusted to their new environment. Normally, these bats feed on insects they catch on the wing. But in the lab, they'll settle for anything we can dig up. Mickey was an orphan when we found him, but he quickly became the lab pet. Somehow he had his own ideas about food. Even a doll's nursing bottle wasn't much of an attraction at first. But it wasn't long before Mickey felt right at home with his bottle. And in a few short days, the two were inseparable. But life isn't all worms and nursing bottles in a science lab. There's work to be done, even for bats. These bats never served in the army, but they know what an obstacle course is. The bat's wing spread far exceeds the space between the crossbars. Only clever maneuvering will permit him to fly between them. As the bat is released, we cross our fingers and hope he'll do what the book says. Now watch this. Bats are not blind. They have eyes and they can see. But the key to the bat's success in avoiding obstacles is not his ability to see. To prove it, we'll blindfold him and put him through another test. Blindfolded, he dodges those bars just as skillfully as he did before. But how does he do it? Well, science knows that bats emit strange cries in flight. They can't be picked up by the ordinary microphone. They're far beyond the range of the human ear. But a very special high-frequency amplifier tuned to 32,000 cycles for this particular bat translates these inaudible sounds into sounds we can hear. Through numerous experiments, science learned that the bat's ears are extremely sensitive to high-pitched sounds. And the question arose, can the bat's own cries be signals that guide it in flight? Well, let's tie the bat's mouth closed so he can't make these sounds and see what happens. Incidentally, here's the only creature we know that can get into trouble by keeping his mouth shut. Science has proved conclusively that bats are guided in flight by echoes of their signal cries. Why, that's actually a kind of radar. Man's radar takes tons of equipment and a large crew of men to operate it. But the bat carries its remarkable radar around in its head. Radar that guides it safely through the intense darkness of the caves, that keeps it from colliding with obstacles it cannot see, or with the thousands of other bats flying through the same darkness. How did the bat learn to use radar so many ages before it was even a dream in the mind of man? Where did the bat get such marvelous equipment? Obviously, this is all a part of an intelligent plan, but whose intelligence? The bat's? If we were to visit the beaches of Southern California on certain spring and summer evenings, we'd find them dotted with campfires. But the people around these fires are not picnickers. Believe it or not, these folks are fishing. Yes, grunion fishing. And by tradition, the hot dogs and the marshmallows are all a part of this unusual sport. But now it's H hour on grunion night. And here comes the lookout shouting, "Hey, grunion, come on, come on!" And they're off in the strangest sport on earth. But wait a minute. Where's the fishing tackle? You can't fish without poles or nets, or can you? It looks like all you need for this kind of fishing is a reckless enthusiasm and a good boarding house grab. Oh yes, and a bucket. You'd really have some fun trying to carry an armload of these fellas. Yes, and dry clothes to go home in are a must for grunion fishermen. Because in the excitement, something like this always seems to happen. Fish out of water. Yes, and these fish haven't been washed up on the beach by accident. They deliberately come out of the water to lay their eggs on shore. The only fish in the world that spawn on land. Fish nesting on land. One of the rarest of all biological phenomena. A spectacle so unique it can be witnessed nowhere in the world except on a few Southern California beaches. Fish depend upon water for life, just as we depend upon air. And yet, at the very risk of its life, the grunion comes out of the water into this foreign, hostile environment. Here, the female digs into the sand, tail first, and lays her eggs. Once they are fertilized, the desperate struggle for survival begins. If she misses the next wave, she has little chance to survive. The eggs are always laid when the water is far up on the beach. Then, night after night, the waters recede until they reach the lowest tide. By then, the eggs may be hundreds of feet from the water's edge, far from the element in which the fish must eventually live. Here the eggs develop, lying buried in the warm, moist sand. On the beaches of Southern California in the early spring or summer, it's possible to find these eggs by digging almost anywhere along the high tide line. Careful searching uncovers tiny pockets of these brightly colored eggs. In the photomicrographic laboratory of the Moody Institute of Science, the embryonic development, which normally takes place under the sand, is studied with the microscope. These eggs were fertilized only seconds ago, and now one is being prepared for observation. Within this tiny egg, a miracle is about to take place. With the aid of the lapse time photomicrographic equipment, which compresses days into seconds on the screen, we will be able to witness this amazing spectacle, the magical unfolding of life through cell division. The first faint stirrings of life come when the blastodermal cap, seen in the circle, divides into two separate cells. In about 30 minutes, the second cleavage becomes evident, resulting in 4 cells. Successive divisions produce 8, 16, 32, 64, and so on up into the hundreds of thousands of cells. This formless cluster is actually a fish in the making. It contains all the characteristics of the adult grunion. Its size, its shape, its habits, yes, even the germ of that mysterious wisdom by which it will someday be able to perfectly time its spawning with the movement of the tides. Food for the growing embryonic fish is supplied by numerous globules of oil in the center of the egg. With every surge, the cells divide until eventually there will be millions upon millions of them, each having just as much claim to being the original cell as any of the millions of others. And yet they're all different. Soon they will take their place in the various parts of the body as bones and blood and scales and fins. Out of this indistinguishable mass of cells in some mysterious, unknown way, the form of a fish is building up around an invisible, intangible framework. But where is the mold or the pattern that is shaping these cells into a living creature? The first recognizable features are the head and the eyes. And the first action of the fish, controlled by its newly formed muscles, is revealed by the lapse time camera as a series of convulsive jerks. The head and the eyes are more plainly visible now, and on the opposite side of the egg, the tail is beginning to form. At this stage of its growth, the embryonic fish is 4 days old. The head and the eyes are well formed now, and the simple heart already at work can be seen. After 8 to 10 days, the egg is ready to hatch. But remember, when it does, it will be a fish. If it were to hatch while buried here in the sand, far from the water, it wouldn't have a chance in the world to live. But the grunion egg never hatches until the water reaches it, and then it hatches instantly. Now, you can keep these eggs buried in the sand for weeks or months, and they won't hatch. But now let's pour some salt water on them and see what happens. This mysterious hatching of the egg is just as definitely connected with the movement of the tides as is the spawning. There are 2 main tides which have their peak at the full and the dark of the moon. This complex pattern represents the rise and fall of the daily tides over a period of a month. Suppose the eggs were laid any night before the peak tide. A higher tide the following night would wash them out of the sheltering sand and expose them to their enemies. Or, if they were laid on a night too long after the peak, they would be washed out by a rising tide just a few nights later, before they had a chance to develop. Actually, there are only a few nights when the grunion can lay her eggs successfully, when the tide is at its peak, or the first few nights after the peak. And she must choose not only the right night, but the right hour of that night. For even if she should lay her eggs on the right night, but when the tide is still rising, they would be washed out by that very tide. Or if she should wait too long after the peak and lay her eggs while that night's tide is receding, they would be washed out by the rising tide of the next night and destroyed. Only during this magic hour can the eggs be laid where they will grow and develop safely. But that isn't all. For during this hour, certain waves are higher than others. So the grunion has to choose not only the right month, the right night of that month, and the right hour of that night, but when the right wave during that hour. Terrible and treacherous are the tides. The story of their treachery is told in warning markers along many a fog-bound rocky coast. No sea captain can guide his vessel safely without a knowledge of the tide. But the Grunion possesses a far better knowledge of the tides than the most experienced mariner, and is able to turn these tides, so destructive to man, to its own advantage, and by them preserve its very life and the life of its young. Remember that first garden you had when you were a youngster? You planted the seeds and covered them so carefully. You rather expected the plants to pop out of the ground like this, but somehow it didn't work out quite that way. And as you waited, you got to wondering, well, maybe I planted those seeds upside down. Well, is there a right and a wrong end to a seed? On opening a bean seed, we find that the embryonic root points in a definite direction. This determines the direction of initial growth. So it is possible to plant a seed upside down. But no matter which way the seed is placed in the ground, the plant always grows in the right direction. Even if we try to fool the growing seed, it doesn't get mixed up. The root reverses it. If we turn a growing plant on its side, the stem will grow upward, even if it has to bend at right angles to do so. Of course, the root grows down, because down is the logical place to find water. But if it encounters a dry region like the red area, it limits its growth to the area of moisture. Now, the shoot grows up because up is the logical place to find the light it must have. But if light can't be found by growing upward, the shoot will grow in any direction to reach it, even if it has to detour through a small hole to get there. Plant two seeds at the same time. Grow one in the light, the other in the dark. The one in the light soon has well-developed leaves, but the one in the dark has wasted no energy in developing leaves, which would be useless in the dark. It has expended all of its energy in a frantic effort to reach the light. This is the principle that causes a tree to defy the law of gravity. Have you ever paused to consider the enormous forces at work in a single tree? This tree is probably the oldest living thing on earth. It was almost 2,000 years old when Christ was born. For 3,800 years, this tree has been lifting at least 10 tons of water each day to its top. A total of more than 10 trillion foot-pounds of work. It is evident that there is an infinite power behind the mystery of life. But is this a blind, unintelligent, impersonal force? Well, you've been thinking, haven't you? That's all right. Don't feel embarrassed. It's a good thing. It's good to think once in a while about things like where you came from and why you're here, maybe about where you're going. Now about that matter of origin. No doubt you formed some opinion as to where you came from. Well, let's look at it this way. Suppose that you've never seen and you've never heard of a watch. Then one day you find one. You're intrigued by its appearance and by that strange sound it makes. If you're anything like the rest of us, it isn't long before you have the back off trying to find out what makes it tick. Now you're still more intrigued with the intricate wonders of that mechanism. If you're observant, it isn't long before you notice that there's a definite relationship between the movement of those hands and the passage of time. You discover that you have a useful article. But now you've got to explain the origin of the watch. Well, you might develop the theory that the watch just happened, especially if you were trying to convince yourself that nobody owned the watch. You could argue that the atoms and the molecules of the various parts just got together by accident. But the simplest kind of reasoning should tell you that somebody made those parts. Somebody put them together for a purpose. Well, How about that eye with its automatic focus and light control? Or that tiny musical instrument inside the human ear? Or that heart with its endless capacity for work? Or the bat with its radar magic? Or the directional wizardry of birds in flight? Or the grunion egg with its tiny cells building life about a ghost-like frame? Or the seeking wonder of growing things? Is all this the product of blind chance? You know, when you come right down to it, there are only two views we can take. Either this all happened by accident, or it's the result of design and plan. You might just shrug your shoulders and say, well, it's just a matter of personal opinion, and let it go at that. You might, that is, but for the fact that this is an issue which vitally affects your whole life. It's going to determine how you think and how you live. For after all, if man is just an accident, then he has no responsibility except that responsibility is upon himself. There's no law but the law of convenience and desire. There's no ultimate right or wrong. And when people think and live according to that philosophy, the result is chaos. But if, on the other hand, there's a plan, then there's a planner. If there's a design, there's a designer. In other words, there's a God. You know, it isn't hard to believe in a God. It's the simplest and the most logical thing in the world. Oh, I know that some people are honestly confused by the maze of conflicting arguments. I guess maybe they just try to make the thing too hard. But for a lot of people, the problem gets complicated only when they begin to worry about who owns the watch. In other words, believing in God involves a responsibility, and they don't want that responsibility. They don't want anybody telling them what's right or what's wrong or how to live or act, not even the God who made them. But when you get as many people as there are in the world today living and acting as if there were no God, it's no wonder the world's in a mess. When we see the results of unbelief, it doesn't seem at all far-fetched to say that the only hope for the world as a whole, or for you as an individual, is faith in God. Not just belief in a supreme being or a great force, but belief in a personal God who loved you enough to provide a salvation for you. For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whosoever believeth in him should not perish, but have everlasting life. I'd like you to meet a friend of mine. His name is Linnaeus. Electrophorus electricus Linnaeus. Here at the lab, we just call him Joe. He isn't exactly what you'd call a raving beauty, is he? But he has his points. For one thing, he's quite a swimmer. Notice the wave motion of the long ventral fin. As the waves travel toward the rear, the eel is propelled forward. Reverse, the waves travel toward the head. How about ascending and descending? Well, to ascend, he merely starts waves at the center, which go both ways. And to descend, the waves start at both ends and work toward the middle. Joe is commonly called an electric eel. But actually, it isn't an eel at all, but a fish of the carp or catfish family. Now, the eel part of his name may not be correct, but he sure came by the electric part honestly. There are stories of cattle, horses, even human beings being killed by the electric shock of eels just like this. In fact, along the Amazon River, ranchers have lost so many cattle that they have what they call electric eel drives. They herd the eels into shallow water and then they kill them with their machetes. Oh yes, they have insulated handles on the machetes. Now, of course, electrical impulses can't be seen. But if we put an electrode at each end of the tank we can hear the electrical discharge on a loudspeaker. Now, those gentle pulses are part of the eel's radar system. In some mysterious way, he uses them to locate his food. Now, so far as we know, all adult electric eels are blind. They have heavy cataracts on their eyes. Now, eels feed on small fish, and if it weren't for this radar system, they'd starve to death. Now, when an eel locates a fish or when he is disturbed, he puts out what we call the double whammy. This is a terrific shock that stuns anything in the water nearby. The only way you can describe Joe's table manners is to say that they're downright shocking. The electric eel, unlike most fish, is an air breather. It must rise to the surface from time to time for air. For this reason, he can be quite comfortable out of water. Now, the vital organs of the electric eel are all in the front 10 inches of his body. The rest is pure power plant. And believe it or not, he can generate more than 500 volts. Here we have a bank of 36 neon lamps. We'll connect these to our eel electrodes. Now, of course, the eel is designed to operate in water. His electrical system doesn't function too well in air, but even under these conditions, he should give us enough power to light the lights. For some reason, people seem to find it difficult to believe that a fish can put out any considerable amount of power. Even some of the folks here at the laboratory have been just a little bit skeptical about Joe's electrical prowess. And for that reason, we've asked a few of them if they wouldn't help us in an experiment. Will you have the group come in now, please? All right, Dave, you'd stand right over here, please. The rest of you just line up there. You're right over here, Mr. Humphrey, that's fine. Now, Dave, if you'll take this, please, and hold it in your right hand. Lloyd, you hold this one. That's fine. Now, everybody join hands. That's right. Now, you're connected in series. Now, there are 5 of you. That means that each of you will receive just 1/5 of the total voltage of the eel. Now, relax. We'll give you the low voltage tap first. You ready? Did you feel that? Wasn't bad, was it? All right. Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to have you meet a group of confirmed believers in electric eels. Thank you very much. Now, where did that electricity come from? Strange as it may seem, the eel's electric tissue is made up of cells very much like the cells that make up the nerves of our own bodies. These cells are called electroplaques. Here, it's a crude model of one of these cells. Actually, the electroplaque is a tiny battery, 1/25 of an inch thick. Now, in a flashlight, there are 3 cells. Each cell generates 1.5 volts. 3 of them in series produce the 4.5 volts necessary for the lamp. The eel's battery produces 1/10 of a volt. 10 of them in series will produce 1 volt. Well, at this rate, it would take 5,000 of these to produce the 500 volts of the eel. Well, he's got them and then some. An eel like Joe here probably has 250,000 electric cells. Connect them in series, 5,000 of them, and you have the 500 volts. The rest of them are connected in parallel to build up the current capacity. Now, each one of these tiny batteries has an electronic switch controlled by a signal sent along the nerve fiber connected to it. When an eel wants to shock something, it throws hundreds of thousands of switches all at once just by thinking about it. But what to me is even more amazing is that when Joe's battery is run down, he can recharge them, all of them, in just 1,000th of a second. That's quite a power plant, isn't it? The eel's electrical system is composed of 3 main parts. The first is called the large electric organ. This is the source of the eel's main voltage. Now, the function of this organ, called the organ of Hunter, is still somewhat of a mystery, although scientists believe that in some way it works with the large organ in producing the double whammy. This organ, called the bundle of socks, is to me the most wonderful. It has been definitely identified as the source of those mysterious radar pulses. In other words, this is the power plant for the eel's radar transmitter. Now, of course, a radar system must have a receiver also. Do you notice those pits located in rows along the front part of the eel? The other night I was in New York City talking with Dr. Christopher Coates, director of the New York Zoological Society. Dr. Coates is the world's foremost authority on electric eels. He performed an experiment recently that seems to indicate that those pits are a definite part of the eel's radar receiving system. Now, if Joe is willing to cooperate, we can perform a similar experiment here. The problem is to render Joe's radar system temporarily inoperative. Now, if we paint these pits with an insulating liquid, and if these pits have anything to do with the radar apparatus, Joe will find it very difficult to locate a fish. Oh, he won't go hungry. This is a liquid that will wash off very rapidly. All right, Joe, let's go back into your tank. That's right. Come on out now, like a good fella. Now, we want to give him a good supply of fish. All right, Joe is surrounded by his favorite delicacy, baby trout. But for the next few moments, at least, those fish are just as safe as if there weren't an electric eel within 1,000 miles. You see, Joe's radar's on the blink. Oh, his transmitter's working all right. He's still putting out those radar pulses. Actually, it's his receiver that's not operating. Now, let's think for just a moment about what that means. To a certain extent, we can locate objects with our ears. We can tell roughly the direction from which a sound is coming. But you know, if I were blindfolded, I'd sure hate to try to catch a greased pig simply by listening to its squeal. But this problem, compared to Joe's, is relatively simple. You see, sound travels 1,100 feet per second in air. But Joe's radar pulses travel at the speed of light, 186,000 miles per second. This means that an electric eel's radar system must be able to interpret time difference that is less than 1/1000th of a second. This is so amazing as to be almost beyond belief. Yes, Joe, you're quite a fellow. You may not win any beauty contests, but you've given us a lot to think about. You've given us a new understanding of the God who made us all. With a special camera, we can watch life within the butterfly egg. After about a week, the butterfly egg hatches. But what we see is not a butterfly at all. It's a baby caterpillar. At birth, he's a fun fellow. His head seems much too big for the rest of his body. And like most babies, many times the baby caterpillar's first meal will be his own empty eggshell. This is just the start. His main food is the leaf of the anise plant on which he was born. The growth of a young caterpillar is truly remarkable. After just a few days, his appearance has changed a great deal. He is now much larger, and his skin is an entirely different color. As he stuffs himself with anise leaves for another 2 weeks, the caterpillar will show further changes in appearance. Instead of looking like this, he'll grow into something like this, a full-sized caterpillar. Just a few short weeks makes all this difference, the direct result of an enormous appetite. A butterfly caterpillar is almost all stomach, and keeping that stomach full of tender green leaves appears to be his only purpose in life. There's a good reason for this huge appetite. The caterpillar is stored, and he will need this food when he enters the next stage in the life of a butterfly. But while he's still a caterpillar, he needs protection from birds and other hungry creatures. And the one who made him has not left him helpless. The caterpillar has been given a simple defense, but one that really works. Whenever danger comes near, he shoots out 2 small horns, which fill the air with a strong odor. This odor has earned the swallowtail caterpillar the nickname, the skunk of the insect world. Wherever he goes, the caterpillar is belonged by 8 pairs of legs. The first 3 are jointed. These will be his only legs when he becomes a butterfly. The other legs are little. After several weeks as a caterpillar, he is ready for the next big event. Of a silken loop is an important step in his preparation. First, he ties down the ends of the loop. Then he weaves strand after strand until it forms a strong cord. And once again, we see the Creator's thoughtful care for living things. For, unknown to the caterpillar, in a few days, this cord will become his life belt. After the cord is finished, the caterpillar performs a neat bit of gymnastics and ducks his head through the loop. He adjusts his life belt very carefully, and then hangs quietly for several days. During this period, his extra pairs of legs mysteriously disappear. The rest period comes to an end when the caterpillar body begins to twist and squirm. Suddenly, the skin splits open, and from it begins to emerge something that is no longer a caterpillar and is not yet a butterfly. What we see emerging is a greenish-white case called the chrysalis, in which the caterpillar body will be changed into an adult butterfly. The pumping and squirming continue as the old skin of the caterpillar is shaken off. But this whole mysterious change from caterpillar to chrysalis, how does he manage it? He's never done it before. He's never seen another caterpillar do it. But yet he does exactly the right thing at exactly the right time. Of course, all this is much more than just an accident. Every step has been carefully planned so he will live through the next stage of his life. Can you spot the chrysalis in this picture? Pretty well hidden, wasn't it? This blending of the colors into the background is no accident. It is deliberate camouflage. The caterpillars forming these chrysalids were all of the same type, the Anna swallowtail. Fed the same food, raised under identical conditions, there was just one difference. They were placed on different colored sticks just before entering the chrysalis stage. The emerging chrysalis does not immediately bear any resemblance to its environment. At first, it is greenish-white in color. Almost immediately, however, there is a striking change in color that agrees perfectly with the surroundings. This camouflage is the only protection the helpless insect has during the 2 weeks or so it hangs quietly, awaiting its day of liberation. When this day arrives, the insect jerks violently for a few moments, and then the chrysalis pops open, and from it emerges an adult insect, the butterfly. Of course, he still doesn't look much like a butterfly because his wings have not yet filled out. But this process won't take long. If you watch very closely, you'll see it actually take place. Tiny cubes within the wings are being filled, some with blood, some with air, and some with a liquid that will soon cement, giving rigidity and strength to the butterfly's wings. Have you ever wondered about the beautiful coloring of the butterfly's wings? Under a microscope, we can see that this coloring is due to row after row of feathery scales packed closely together, like shingles on a roof. Each tiny scale adds to the beautiful design, and it takes many, many thousands to cover the wings of a single butterfly. And now the Anna swallowtail butterfly is fully grown. Where does the butterfly come from? Now we know. We have hidden among the leaves of the anise plant. Next, the busy caterpillar, working hard to store up food. Then the chrysalis, a cozy cradle from which will emerge the butterfly. We have explored one of God's most beautiful secrets. We have discovered not only his great wisdom in creating this lovely creature, but also his thoughtful, wise God is concerned about all his creatures.
Hungry? Well, who isn't? Appetite seems to be one thing every living creature has in common. The eating habits of animals is one of the most diverse studies in nature. God has employed a seemingly endless variety of physical differences. The jungle is full of strange animals with odd eating habits. This creature looks like he has a tail on both ends. It's an anteater. His main diet is termites and ants. His long, razor-sharp claws are a hindrance to walking, but just the tool he needs for tearing open old stuff trunks loaded with termites. Digging termites out of their narrow tunnels would be an impossible task for most animals. The anteater has exactly the right equipment, a long, slender, sticky tongue. He thrusts it deep into the termite burrows, trapping the ants and termites on its sticky surface and drawing them back into its mouth. The suspenders, by the way, have nothing to do with keeping his trousers up. They just happen to be unusual markings on this altogether unusual animal. The powerful claws and strong prehensile tail are equally helpful when the anteater dines in the trees. There seems to be no lack of ants in his pantry. The anteater, equipped in a remarkable way to live exclusively on insects. For many years, man has known that rattlesnakes could, in some strange, mysterious manner, find their prey in the dark. But how? In a sense, the rattlesnake has two sets of eyes, and the organ that sees in the dark is an apical depression on either side of the head. Dr. Raymond C. Coles and Dr. Theodore H. Bullock of the University of California at Los Angeles have contributed much to the world's new knowledge of this strange phenomenon. The method employed in obtaining this information is a unique and interesting experiment. Dr. Coles milks the rattler of its venom. Dr. Bullock anesthetizes the rectal. The snake is blindfolded, depriving him of sight in the realm of visible light. Platinum electrodes are connected to the nerves coming from the pit organ so that the tiny signals flashed from the organ to the snake's brain can be intercepted. These signals are amplified so that they may be heard on a loudspeaker or recorded on a graph recorder. And now for the test. The snake is obviously excited by the human hand. A warm-blooded animal has crossed its path. The snake can see the invisible infrared rays from the heat of a human hand. An ice cube is of little interest to the rattler. Why? Well, an animal that cold would be dead. Lighting a match in front of the snake is like turning on a searchlight with infrared rays. The recorder shows a sudden violent reaction. A piece of special heat-absorbing glass cuts off the rays, and the snake's reaction stops. The pit viper, night prowler of the desert and mountainside, marvelously equipped by the Creator to find its necessary food on the darkest night. The ocean is a veritable sea soup. The abundance of microscopic plant and animal life is quite beyond measure. There are a number of creatures in the ocean very well fitted for straining seawater of its microscopic inhabitants. One of these is the barnacle. It is found on rocks along the shore and on wharf pilings in prodigious numbers. They remain permanently fixed in one place, fastened by means of a leathery stalk called a gooseneck. But the main part of its body is encased in a protective shell. When the barnacle is covered by the rising tide, the shell pops open, and the legs of the animal, looking like feathered ostrich plumes, are thrust out to trap tiny plants and animals. These invisible creatures are strained from the water by the feather-like fish net. When the legs, called cirri, are drawn back into the shell, the captured food is carried deep inside to its mouth. One zoologist described the barnacle as an animal that stands on its head and kicks food into its mouth with its feet. Have you ever seen the fish that spits? The archerfish has a good reason for its odd behavior. It's shooting for game. A stream of water is shot from the fish's mouth like a bullet. The prey is stunned by the force of the water and drops to the surface below. The spitting fish seldom misses the target. The archerfish has an unusual problem, the very serious one of refraction. Because the fish is under the water, he sees the insect where it isn't. Have you ever tried to shoot fish? If you have, you know it's practically impossible. For a fish to make all the split-second computations necessary to hit the target would seem utterly fantastic, wouldn't it? But the archerfish does it, time and time again. Marksmanship we cannot attribute to its own reason or intelligence. Again, our little creature has been endowed by the Creator with an innate skill for obtaining food that would be completely out of its reach. The chameleon is the only animal in the world that can lasso its food more than a body's length away without moving anything but its tongue. The eyes are another example of unusual equipment. They are mounted in ball turrets, and one sight organ is able to rotate independently of the other. While one eye is searching for an enemy, the other eye is searching for a bite to eat. When the tasty prey is sighted, the eyes work in unison, probably to improve the aim of the tongue. The skin of the chameleon is a heavy plate of armor. And it's not only tough, it's made up of an amazing cell structure that enables the chameleon a moment's notice. Camouflage is as old as life itself. These baby chameleons are just a few hours old, and already they're on their own, making immediate use of all that God has given them, from the tiny ball turret eyes to the feet, the tongue, and the tail. Imagine something like this happening to you when you were just a few hours old. To the chameleon, it's all a part of this wonderful new life. No formulas or bottles are necessary. When the tiny reptile feels the need for sustenance, he simply helps himself. A grasshopper is a giant compared to the baby chameleon, but the little fellows show no fear. Perhaps they realize that someday a grasshopper will be nothing more than a bite to eat. Everywhere in nature, we see the unmistakable evidence of God's creative wisdom. The eating habits of his creatures are among those commonplace things that speak so eloquently of God's design and thoughtfulness. God has provided for our needs, too, in a very special way. He has not only provided for our physical needs, but our spiritual hunger as well. For he has declared, "Man shall not live by bread alone, but by every word that proceedeth out of the mouth of God."
Have slowly but surely made him master of his environment. The products of man's ingenuity, but no less amazing, the lowly spider wanders without anything resembling man's transit or plumb line, pattern, or without any tool except those which God has fashioned as a part of her body. There are an estimated 100,000 species throughout the world, each possessing a number of engineering skills that qualify him as a master craftsman. For example, the orb weaver, garden variety of spider, engineers webs in a most exquisite fashion. Her gossamer highways bridge leafy chasms with almost invisible ropes of silk, each of incredible strength, stronger in fact than steel of equal size. She manufactures her rope from silk glands in her body as she goes along. 6 spinnerets located at the tip of her abdomen release 5 different kinds of liquid from 3,600 holes. She can spin a single strand, a heavy cable, or a broad band. Under her careful control, the silk may be elastic or non-elastic, sticky or non-sticky, colored or transparent. From it, she will manufacture foundations, guy wires, scaffolding, trap lines, signal cords, mummy cases, baby cradles, balloons, kites, blankets, and cushions. In making its web, this first throws out a strong but narrow bridge. This becomes the base for the entire structure. The spider then spins a series of radiating spokes as a framework. And then, beginning at the hub of the spokes, it lays down a circular pattern of threads in an ever-widening spiral. The hind legs are used both to measure off the proper distance between the silvery strands and to place them into position. For man to weave his great aerial highways of steel and concrete requires the combined work of hundreds of engineers and many months or even years of planning. But the spider is endowed with the ability to perform an engineering feat that defies man's ability to fully comprehend. The spider's construction is accomplished without any previous training and without any evident blueprint or pattern. While waiting for some juicy morsel to blunder into its trap, some spiders will station themselves in the center of the web. Others, however, keep hidden nearby. When the trap is sprung, the vibrations of the insect's struggles are carried to the spider, which immediately rushes out to subdue its prey and carefully package it up for a future meal. On closer inspection, we find that the spider is not an insect at all. He is an arachnid, something very different. For one thing, the spider has 8 legs in place of the insect's 6. He has 2 body sections instead of the insect's 3. And unlike the typical insect, he has no wings or antennae. Now perhaps you're wondering how the spider avoids being caught in its own trap. Well, the reason is not hard to find. The web is actually made up of 2 kinds of silk. One kind is elastic and sticky. The other is inelastic and non-sticky. The spokes of the web, the framework, and the guy lines that support it are all of inelastic and non-sticky silk. But the spirals that connect the spokes are very elastic and stick to everything that touches them. The web is not the only example of spider engineering. Great skill is exercised in the construction of the egg sac, a silken ball which will protect the eggs and, later, the newly hatched spiderlings. First, a downy cushion is spun to cradle the egg. When this has reached a satisfactory size, egg-laying begins. The lustrous yellow cap grows hour by hour until some 200 eggs have been deposited. When all the eggs are laid, they are covered with strand after strand of silk. Having made this super nursery, insulated, waterproof, and furnished with the richest silk, satins, and floss blankets, the mother takes no more interest in her young, and she soon dies. Before long, the little ones will emerge from their cushioned comfort, and without being taught, will immediately begin to build miniature webs of exquisite beauty. Silk spinning is by no means confined to the orb weaver. There's a certain fat, grotesque creature known as the bolus spider. Now, of course, the word bolus refers mainly to a kind of lariat used by the Argentine gaucho. But long before the days of the gaucho, our little spider was making good use of the bolus. Chances are you've never seen her. For, like a great many spiders, she's active only at night. The spider forms her bolus by rolling up a little ball of sticky silk, which she hangs from the end of a strong silken line. Then she pulls herself up to a vantage point, catches hold of the bolus, and prepares to cast it at the first insect that comes within range. What it is that attracts the insect is not definitely known. It's possible that the reflection of light on the swinging bolus is part of the answer. Be that as it may, since the spider is ready and waiting, let's dangle a tasty morsel in front of her and see what happens. The spider makes use of a pair of built-in hypodermic needles to put her victim to sleep. She injects just enough poison to paralyze the prey, but not enough to kill it. That way, the food remains fresh. Later, the spider returns to feed by draining juices from the body of the victim. Eventually, only the empty shell is left. At hatching time, a spider nursery is usually overcrowded. Like most of her kind, the female bolus spider will often produce more than 150 little spiderlings. For a long time, man's excursions underwater were limited by how long he could hold his breath. Various devices have extended that limit from a few minutes to several hours. A diving suit with a complex system of air and communication lines, lead shoes, and descending line provide him with a cumbersome but reasonably efficient means of remaining submerged. Another underwater breathing device consisting of compressed air bottles, special demand regulators, face mask, and breathing tube allow for a much greater freedom of movement. As a result, thousands of the more adventurous have taken up this exciting sport to add another dimension to their lives. But wait a minute. What about this little creature, the Argyroneta, or diving spider? No elaborate equipment here, just a bubble of air. No heavy cable or descending line, just a thin strand of silk. The home of the Argyroneta is unique. A silvery bell filled with air and attached to the stems of submerged plants. Feeding, molting, mating, and the rearing of the family all are carried on beneath the water. Like other spiders, she is equally well equipped for spinning silk. The roof of her house is a network of silken strands. No heavy door bars entrance to this silvery bungalow. She has but to touch the wall and she's in. The problem is to get in and out without dividing the house into a duplex, and stay out without drowning. This is accomplished in a most ingenious fashion. The spider breathes through openings in its abdomen. In order to survive, it must always retain a life-giving bubble of air to cover its apparatus. The spider's abdomen bristles with tiny hairs with hooks on the end. They not only make it possible to capture the large bubble, but also retain sufficient air for unhampered work and travel beneath the surface. There is no need for the Argyroneta to spin a web to capture her prey. The surface of the water provides a potential trap for every insect that hops or flies over its surface. Occasionally, a moth drops in for lunch. The spider's lunch, that is. Unceremoniously, she is escorted to Davy Jones' locker. Yes, at last man has solved the problems of limited ventures beneath the tide, apparently accepted by this strange family of creatures that move so gracefully through a fluid sky. But we cannot help but pause and wonder at the engineering skill imparted to this little spider that enables it to live a lifetime beneath the water. Actually, we have hardly begun to observe the diversity of skills spiders possess. Each day we see doors of every kind, of every size and shape, and for every purpose. But actually, none of these is quite as remarkable as a door fashioned long before man ever dreamed of the device. Of course, this door isn't easy to see, but that's part of the plan. The camouflage affords real protection to the trapdoor spider. Snugly fitted into the ground, the door is lined with layer upon layer of silk, a marvel of engineering, and no less a marvel is the spider herself. For if, in spite of camouflage, her privacy is disturbed, she hangs onto the door with all her might. In order to break her hold, a pull of at least 140 times her weight is needed. The trapdoor spider is a skillful engineer that has never seen a drawing board or a transit. And when the need for building a home arises, excavation proceedings get underway. The spider is well equipped for the job at hand. Both ends work at once. On the south end of a northbound trapdoor spider is a pair of spinnerets. These contain tiny openings through which the fluid from the silk glands is spun into fragile strands of silk. On the north end, a pair of strong pedipalps function like a steam shovel, digging the dirt and placing it precisely where it should be. The God that made this wonderful little builder provided her with all the necessary tools. When she encounters excessive dirt, the steam shovel becomes a catapult. The finishing work on the trapdoor is the surfacing of the underside with a fine silken lining. When the job is completed, there will be a lustrous coating of silk from the top of the nest to the bottom, and the coating will be as smooth as glass and as soft as down. What could be more fitting after a hard day's work than a good square meal? Man's achievements are the result of technical advancements covering many generations. But not so with the spider. He did not learn to make a web. He did not fashion the intricate tools that defy man's ability to fully comprehend or duplicate. He did not equip himself to live in these strange environments. This is not the work of a beginner, but this is. The little spider that fashioned this trapdoor had never done it before. In the spider world, skilled craftsmen are not made but born. The spider's abilities are not due to its own ingenuity. It possesses tools that it had no part in fashioning. Clearly, then, the engineering marvels it performs reflect not its own wisdom, but that of God, the great planner and engineer who created the spider and traced in it the blueprint for a particular pattern of life.
Hello there. Welcome to Moody Institute Vintage. Say, do you like mystery stories? Well, we have them. In the tradition of all good mysteries, the pursuit of the haunted house. The science lab seems a strange place to let the ghost judge. Our story is truth. Before we're finished, I think you'll agree that truth is stranger than the strangest mystery. Yes, time is a mysterious thing. Have you ever tried to define time? The harder you search for a definition, the more elusive it becomes. We're going to explore the mystery of time in the laboratory. Before we find the ghost, we'll have to sort through some facts. We'll find it. There he is. Hello, Pete. How things going? Fine, we're about ready to roll in a high-speed shot. Oh, that's great. Mr. Margosian is one of our skilled technicians here at Moody Institute of Science. In addition to a rich background of photographic experience, he's shown a more than usual interest in the subject of time. Pete, suppose you could tell us just a bit about the equipment that you use? I'd be glad to. Most important piece of equipment is right here. It enlarges a period of time instead of a bit of matter. How fast will the camera be running on this tape? About 3,000 frames per second. Let's see. That'll stretch 1 second into about 2 minutes, won't it? Yes, 2 minutes and 5 seconds to be exact. And this will give us an opportunity to observe some interesting properties in liquid. We're using milk in this experiment because it photographs easily. I will just flow and... Would you start the camera now? Now, ready? Did you ever drop a steel ball into a bowl of milk? There's probably no good reason why you should have, but it does make an interesting high-speed test. Watch. study time, we must venture beyond the ordinary. And when we do, it opens up a whole new realm. Pete, would you help me with an experiment? Sure. Hey, wait a minute. You have in mind what I think you do. Oh, thanks. But I'll be happy to set it up over here for you. Well, maybe that would be safer, Pete. You know, if William Tell had been in the chicken business instead of the apple business, the story might have gone something like this. It's a bit disconcerting to realize that just a fleeting moment of stuff we call time can introduce you to a whole eternity. The high-speed camera tells us part of the story of time. But strangely enough, the time compressor will show us even more. The time-lapse camera, time compressor, is just the opposite of a high-speed camera. Instead of slowing things down, it speeds them up. The world about us is alive with action and movement that we miss because it's too slow. There's a veritable symphony of movement that we never see because we're locked up in our own little time compartment. The time compressor can help us break out of our time prison. Here's a good example of movement that we can't see. Let's set the clock now for 11 o'clock. Right, the clock is running. The hands are moving all the time. That is, not unless we use the time compressor. Did it seem to you that the hands of the clock speeded up and slowed down? Well, actually, they didn't change speed at all. The clock kept right on running at standard clock speed. You've been watching it for the whole day. Now, we just changed your time reference by changing the interval like this. Every time the lights go on, the camera takes one picture. You're still not convinced about that clock. Maybe this will help. That isn't the distant rose. It's a flower right out of the garden. But this time, you watch the clock and the rose. Yeah, this is a real rose. And these are real butchers, too. You see, I haven't saved since you started to watch that rosebud open 3 days and nights ago. Gives you something to think about, huh? This is a 3-foot length of standard 16mm motion picture film. This 3 feet of film could go through the high-speed camera in a... Oh, I shaved while you were looking at the close-up of the film. You see, we used the time-lapse camera to take the close-up, so there was plenty of time. This 3 feet of film could go through the high-speed camera in a thousandth of a second. The same length of film in the time-lapse camera could take days, months, or even years to expose. according to the interval that we use between exposures. I suppose that we could call a piece of film like this a memory with a variable time reference. Say, would you like to take a nice 2-day vacation? All right, sit back, relax, and enjoy yourself.
I got a secret location. I got a
A number of years ago in Germany, man gave to the world a new concept. It shook the scientific world from top to bottom, changed the course of human history, and gave us power. The man, Albert Einstein. The concept, relativity. That strange, fantastic relationship between time, distance, and matter. Now, an important part of that concept can be expressed in a simple equation. Energy equals mass times the speed of light squared. The equivalence of mass and energy. Basic formula that unlocks the secrets of the atom. But equally, if not more important, that relationship between Now, we can't speak of the equivalence of time and space. They're not exact. But we can say that they are relative, or they are all bound up together. Just obtuse theory to say? Well, maybe so. Every day there is new concrete evidence to prove it true. Let's suppose that at some day in the Buck Rogers future, you decide to take a trip to a planet satellite of the star Sirius. As long as we're supposing, let's say that your atom-powered rocket ship is capable of traveling at 100 millionths the speed of light. Now, of course, this is very close to 186,284 miles a second. In view of the fact that Sirius is 9 light years from the Earth, it would take just a little over 18 years to make the round trip. Naturally, you plan to take a large supply of food, but all you'd need would be a sack lunch. Traveling at this speed, not only would your watch slow down by a factor of 70,000, but your heart, respiration, digestion, appetite, all would slow down in the same ratio. You could leave the Earth some morning right after breakfast. By the time you got to Sirius, you'd be ready for a sandwich. And when you got back to the Earth, you'd be just hungry enough for a good dinner. But then would come the surprise. You'd find that while you were only 1 day older, your children would all be grown up and through college, and all your friends would be 18 years older than when you left them just 12 hours ago by year 1. A concept such as this is almost impossible for the human mind to grasp. So far beyond our normal experience. But maybe this is it. First of all, listen to my heart. Now, let me start the clock so that you can become accustomed to the rhythm. The art. It looks normal, doesn't it? But if we could accelerate this room and everything in it to the speed of light, 186,284 miles a second, time would stand still. My heart would stop beating. The clock would be stopped. Everything would squeeze into a line, infinitely changed. Now, we can't speed the room up to the speed of light, of course. But with the magic of some very special photography, we can show you exactly what would happen if we could speed up the room to 90% of the speed of light, 167,000 miles per second. Are you ready? All right. There's our speed outbreak. We're going to travel in that direction. Look what happens. For
My voice is shaking. Look at the cloud. Alright, let's go back to normal.
This time, we're going to accelerate vertically instead of horizontal.
All the yards
When we bring it to the horizontal. When the room was accelerated, everything seemed normal to me. My voice sounded the same. The rhythm of the clock remained constant. The yardstick seemed the same in both directions. That's because I was accelerated along with the room. But you, as a stationary observer, were aware of the changes. Now, of course, these visual effects that you noticed were achieved in this case by the use of a Panavision lens, a variable aspect ratio lens. But the effect was exactly the same as if the room had actually been accelerated to 90% of the speed of light. These are called relativistic effects. The knowledge we've been discussing creates a Frankenstein monster which is about to destroy us. Has science somehow become an evil thing? True science is a body of facts, and facts are not of themselves immoral. They become good or bad merely as they used to when people. The discovery of nuclear energy has brought the potential of enormous benefits to mankind. At the same time, it's given man the ability to destroy it, to wipe out civilization. Now, which will it be? Well, frankly, I don't know. But this right, the very force, fact, which gave man the ability to blast himself into eternity, these very facts contain powerful moral and spiritual implications, which just might keep us apart. We considered weird and fantastic. But the implications to which we have just referred are the strangest and the most fantastic of all. Once again, they involve this relationship between time and space. Would you like to see with your own eyes 1,000,000 years into the past and see it in the present? As though right now? Oh, you can. Tonight, take a little drive out into the country, away from the city life. If the night is clear, your eyesight is good, you will be able to see in the constellation of Andromeda a faint, hazy object. It's called the Andromeda Nebula. It's actually another universe, another galactic system, over 1 billion light years out in space. While you're looking, remember this. The light reaching your eye tonight left that distant universe over 1 billion years ago, and it has been traveling like a wailing banshee through space ever since. You're looking more than 1 billion years into the past. See now. Where the nebula in Andromeda is, how it looks right now, we can't know for sure. For all we know, it may not even exist. All we can know is how it looks over 1 billion years ago. Now, of course, it isn't necessary to go this far into space to encounter the same principle. Every day as you look up at the sun, you're looking 8¼ minutes into the past. For the sun is 8¼ light minutes away from the earth. Also at night, when you look up at an errant, you're seeing 250 years ago, just as though it were right now. From time to time, the newspapers report the discovery of a nova supernova. Any astronomer knows that what we see as now actually happened hundreds or even thousands of years ago. Now, all of this is illustration of the fact that time and space are linked together. But what does this have to do with morality? Well, in the world today, wherever man accepts the concept of a supreme being or creator of the universe, there are at least 3 points of general agreement. First, that God is omnipotent. This is all-powerful. Well, he has to be to create the universe. Then he is omniscient. That is, he is all-knowing. And he is omnipresent. That is, he is present or existent everywhere at once. Do you realize what this means? If time and space are inseparably linked together, then a God who is not limited to space cannot be limited by time. If to him every point in space is real, then every moment of time is now. Let's think for a moment about what this means. Let's say that you were not limited in space. If you were on the star system, you could see what you were doing 9 years ago because you're still doing it. Gives you something to think about, doesn't it? You know, it's an important thing for us to recognize the possibility that every act, good or bad, lives on and on, that we are forever accountable for our actions. But responsibility is the stuff of the character. And accepting a full measure of responsibility is the highest challenge for any young person.
There, I think that ought to do it, Ed. Better plug it in first to make sure that it works. Okay, good. Oh, Hi, fellas. Be right with you.
Hi, Uncle Bob. Take your time, no hurry. Hi, Mr. Udy.
Hi, Jack. Dick, been playing ball?
No, not yet. We were just going out and back.
Well, here you are, Ed. As good as new.
Well, thanks, Bob. How much do I owe you?
Oh, $2 ought to do it. Thank you, Ed.
Well, thanks again. So long, fellas. Have a good game.
We will. Bye, Mr. Udy. Bye.
Well, you two boys look raring to go. Have a big game lined up?
No, just some of the guys are going to work out for a while. Why don't you come out with us, Uncle Bob? We need a good pitcher.
Oh, thanks, fellas. I wish I could. I certainly need the exercise. Now, business is business, you know. And speaking of that, what can I do for you gentlemen?
Dad asked me to bring the
What's wrong with it, Dick?
sticks.
Oh, I see. Sure, well, I think that can be fixed all right.
You know, I think being able to take pictures is terrific.
It is terrific, Jack. Man really came up with something when he invented and developed the marvel of photography.
Who invented photography?
Well, that's hard to say for sure. Way back in the 18th century, a chemist over in Sweden was the first one to experiment with the effects of sunlight on silver chloride. And I guess you could say that started other experiments and ideas. But you know, the first camera was made long before that.
You mean we had cameras before we even knew about photography?
That's just what I mean, Dick. You see, the human eye is the most delicate and marvelous camera in existence. In fact, this camera is just a man-made eye. But it can't compare with your eyes, fellas. Look here. This is the lens of the camera, and it's made along the same principle as the lens of our eye. Now, if we focus the camera on an object, and then we change the distance between the camera and that object, the image becomes blurred, and we have to focus the camera all over again. And that focusing has to be done by hand, you see, just like this. However, in our eye, the focusing is all done automatically. Now, we move around seeing things from different angles and distances all the time. Strong muscles in our eyes change the focus thousands of times each day, and we never even give it a thought.
How about that? Yeah, I never knew that.
And that's not all. You see this little opening in the lens? Now, that's called the iris, and it controls the amount of light that gets into the camera to expose the film. Now, we can open and close the iris like this. See? Now, the camera's iris gets its name from the iris of our eye. The eye's iris automatically opens and closes to adjust for different amounts of light. The more light, the smaller the iris. The less light, the wider the iris opens.
That's terrific, Uncle Bob.
Our eyes are amazing little instruments. But you know, they're only one part of the wondrous body that God has given us. This house we live in is made up of many remarkable things. Come on in here a minute. Now take a look out there at your buddies playing ball. Now you don't see still pictures, do you?
No.
No, of course not. The pictures that the eye gives us are moving pictures. And they're not silent pictures either. They're sound pictures.
That's right, they are. That's because we have ears, huh?
That's because we have ears. What about these ears of ours? Watch your head. You know, I suppose most of us just think of our ears as a couple of things sticking out of the side of our head that are so easy to get dirty, but oh, so hard to get clean, huh? Actually, the human ear is one of the most efficient sound detectors known. A very delicate and sensitive instrument that operates in a remarkable way. Think of how a piano sounds when it's played. Do you realize that the sound you hear is played all over again on a perfect little musical instrument inside your ear? You see, the piano is really just producing sound waves. And when these vibrations reach our brain, then we hear the tones. As the keys are struck, felt hammers hit the strings, causing them to vibrate. Now, each pulsating string sets the air around it vibrating in the same way.
These vibrations, or waves in the air, are picked up by the outer ear, go down the auditory canal, and are carried by the bones of the middle ear to the cochlea, which is all rolled up like a tiny seashell. If the cochlea could be stretched out, we would discover an instrument very much like the piano, except that it is much more wonderful, for the cochlea has more than 24,000 strings. When a piano is played, the ear's remarkable keyboard plays the same tones and sends signals along the nerves to the brain where we perceive it as sound. Of course, the outer ear operates in air, but the cochlea is filled with a liquid. And transferring sound waves from air to a liquid is one of the most difficult problems known to science. But in the ear, this problem is beautifully solved by the precise design of the middle ear with its two diaphragms of just the right size and three connecting bones that provide the exact leverage required. These tiny bones, called the ossicles, are just right to do the job that enables us to hear properly. But the real wonder of these little bones is the fact that their size never changes from the time you were born. The ossicles of an adult and a child are just alike. As you grow and develop, every bone in your body grows and develops. Every one except your ossicles. They are fully developed at birth. Now, can this be just an accident? No, I don't think so.
You know, Uncle Bob, I never really knew how wonderful my eyes and ears are.
Not only our eyes and ears, fellows, but also the other parts of our body, too. The hand. There's a tool that man can never duplicate for usefulness. The whole man has made mechanical hands that can perform such tasks as pouring a cup of coffee. You see, these machines are used to handle hot radioactive material that man can't get near. But that artificial hand can't thread a needle, or perform a life-saving operation, or paint a picture. Did you know our body has a chemical plant, and it's far better than any that man has ever built? The body's chemical plant changes the food we eat into living tissues. It causes the growth of flesh and blood and bones and teeth. Why, it even repairs the body when parts are damaged by accident or disease. The food that we eat is changed into power for work and play. As this fuel is burned in the body's living furnace, energy is set free to drive our body machine. And the same remarkable furnace helps to keep us warm in winter. Why, even in freezing weather, our bodies will sometimes actually overheat. And when this occurs, the body's own cooling system takes over. Drops of perspiration pour from millions of tiny sweat glands in our skin. And with the help of this perspiration, the body's cooling system can keep our temperatures from rising for a limited time, even in heat that will fry a steak. And don't forget our heart. Our very life depends on the proper working of this amazing little instrument. Our heart is actually a little muscular pump, forcing blood through thousands of miles of blood vessels. Blood that carries food and oxygen to every part of our body. The heart pumps an average of 12 pints of blood every minute, and in one day pumps enough blood to fill a gasoline truck to overflowing. During your lifetime, your heart will pump enough blood to fill a string of tank cars 50 miles long. And just think, fellas, if you live to be 65 years old, your heart will have beaten 2,500 million times, and without one single shutdown for repairs. Yes, we've been given a wonderful body machine, which is made of many separate parts. In addition to those we've mentioned, think of our wonderful bone structure, the way in which our body manufactures its own lubricating fluid so our joints can move without squeaking. Then there's our voice box and our vocal cords, which enable us to speak. Our lungs and our blood cells, our nervous system. Then, of course, there's our brain, which in itself is almost beyond our ability to understand.
I guess God went to a lot of trouble just to make our bodies so perfect.
Yes, the way we are made does show his great wisdom and power. And we have a responsibility to take good care of these houses we live in. We should keep ourselves clean, not only from the ordinary kind of dirt that we all get on our hands and faces, but also from the kind that will spoil our hearts and minds. We should eat and drink only those things that are good for us. And we should try to keep ourselves well and strong by getting plenty of fresh air and good clean exercise.
You mean like playing ball?
I mean like playing ball. You better scoot on out there and get that practice started.
Okay, Uncle Bob, and thanks. So long, Uncle Bob. Still wish you could come.
So long, fellas.
Oh, that's right, Mrs. Spencer. It'll be ready any time after noon tomorrow. Fine. Thank you very much. I'll look for you then. Goodbye. Well, hi, gang. What can I do for you?
Yeah.
Now, let me see. Your dog is sick?
No.
You want me to umpire a ball game?
No.
Oh, I know. You want to buy out my fix-it shop and become millionaires.
No.
No. Well, I give up then.
We want to see your new fish. Come on, Uncle Bob.
Show 'em to us, huh?
So that's it, huh? My news certainly travels fast, doesn't it? Who told you I had some new ones?
Tommy and Jimmy Doherty told me.
A couple of kids were talking about it at recess yesterday.
Well, you know, I think it's wonderful that you kids are eager to learn about nature and the wonder world we live in. And you know, honest interest and careful observation are two requirements for becoming good scientists. Come on in my lab. I'd love to show you my new fish. Well, there they are.
Aren't they pretty?
Yes, they are.
Must be lots of fun having an aquarium and taking care of all these little fish.
Well, it is fun. And you know, we can learn many wonderful lessons by carefully observing the way fish live and behave.
Man, oh man, would you look at this one? She sure is beautiful. What kind of fish is she, Uncle Bob?
Well, this she happens to be a he. This is the male Betta splendens. And he is one of the most beautiful fish you'll probably ever see. Now, if you look closely, you'll see just about every color in the rainbow sparkling in his sleek body and flowing fins as he swims around in there. But not only does he possess great beauty, he also has a ferocious temper. This little creature is known as the Siamese fighting fish, because ounce for ounce, he's one of the best and toughest fighters in the world, a real champion scrapper among fish. And strange as it may seem, in the family of Betta splendens, it's the father who cares for the babies and raises the family.
The father? What does the mother fish do?
Well, she performs her sole duty of laying the eggs. You see, the female Betta is much smaller and not nearly as picturesque as the male. And Mr. Betta does not have very much respect for her either. He would just as soon fight with her as he would with another male fish. Now, the Betta is what is known as a surface breather. That is, unlike most other fish, he cannot get enough oxygen from the water, so every few minutes he must rise to the surface and breathe oxygen from the air. But not only does he use air for breathing, he also does something very special with it. When he has decided it's time to raise a family, the male betta will start to build a nest for his expected offspring. And he builds it with some of the air he takes in.
He builds it with air? How does he do that?
He blows bubbles.
Oh, come on, Uncle Bob, you're kidding.
No, I'm not either. That's exactly what he does. First, the father betta will go up to the surface and breathe in a mouthful of air. Then he will swim to the place that he's chosen to build his nest. Now, this is usually by a plant or on the underside of a floating leaf. Then he will blow out the bubble of air, which is coated with very special saliva from his mouth. Now, it takes many trips back and forth to supply the hundreds of little bubbles that are necessary to house his young ones. The finished nest looks like a shimmering layer of dewdrops just below the water's surface. Then, when the mansion with many rooms is complete, the bettas are ready to mate. And what a delightful spectacle of courtship this is. Mr. Betta will dart and dash around the female, spreading out his grand fins and tail, displaying all of his colorful finery, while Mrs. Betta just swims patiently along. Finally, he will coax her up under his newly constructed apartment house, where the female will release the eggs and the male will cover them with a special fluid as they emerge. Now, this process is called fertilization and will cause the eggs to grow into new little baby betta splendens. Then, as the eggs float toward the bottom, Father Betta will swim after them, and when he's gathered up a mouthful of eggs, the male will blow each new egg up among the bubbles in the nest. This process is repeated until there are as many as 200 to 500 eggs in the nest, all sticking tightly to the bubbles and to each other.
I think that's so wonderful and beautiful. Ah, girls are so sentimental.
Oh, your sister's right, Gary. The plan which enables life to continue and flourish across centuries of time is beautiful, if it is thought of in the manner in which the Creator intended. And every one of us should be careful to recognize the beauty and wonder of this process in all forms of life. But I didn't finish telling you about the bettas. After the father betta has fertilized all of the eggs and placed them up in the bubble nest, he swims back and forth underneath the nest, guarding the eggs very jealously. For fish eggs are just what other fish love to eat. In fact, he won't even let the mother betta come around to visit. About a day after they are laid, the eggs begin to hatch. And after 2 days, the water under the bubble nest is filled with new little baby bettas. But after 3 or 4 days, they leave the nest to search out their own food. 3 or 4 months later, they've grown up into adult male and female fish and are ready to mate and reproduce and carry on the endless chain of life of the betta splendens.
I didn't know the father fish always take care of the little ones.
Well, don't, Gary. With some other fish, only the mother raises them. In fact, take a look at these in here. Now, they look like just common, ordinary little fish, don't they?
Mm-hmm.
They're called Egyptian mouth breeders. Now, why do you suppose they're called by that name, Egyptian mouth breeder?
Because it's from Egypt?
Right you are, Kathy. They come from a very famous river in Egypt.
I know, the Nile.
The Nile. Good for you, Bobby.
Hey, Uncle Bob, look at this fish over here. He looks like he has something in his mouth.
You're right, Gary, except for one thing. This he is a she, a female Egyptian mouth breeder. And those tiny things in her mouth are eggs, which will soon hatch into little baby fish. You see, that's where she gets the mouth breeder part of her name, because she raises her babies in her mouth.
What? How does she do that?
Well, let's begin at the beginning. You see, when the mouth breeders have decided that it's time to increase their family, the male will begin to prepare a place for the female to lay her eggs. He digs a little hole in the sand by violently fanning with his fins. Then he gently coaxes the mother mouth breeder over the nest where she lays a few eggs. The male quickly covers the eggs with a fluid that will make them fertile, so they will hatch into new little Egyptian mouth breeders. Now, this process is repeated until about 100 eggs have been laid and fertilized. Now, the Creator has given most wild creatures a strong instinct to protect their young. And Mother Mouth Breeder performs this task in such a remarkable way. Now, even though she has scooped up all of the eggs into her very large mouth, she will not swallow them. She keeps them in her mouth until they hatch into baby fish. The eggs are only about half the size of a BB, but 100 of them make a pretty good mouthful for this little mother fish. During the 15 days that it takes for these eggs to hatch, the mother mouth breeder will not eat any food at all, and she grows quite thin. Now just imagine the self-control she uses to keep from swallowing those tasty eggs that are in her mouth, especially when fish eggs are fish's favorite food. But she will not eat them, even though she grows thinner each day from lack of food. Now, she's not chewing the eggs. That peculiar motion of her jaws keeps fresh water circulating over the eggs, which provides oxygen and also keeps them clean. In about 12 to 14 days, the eggs will hatch into baby fish. But the babies are still kept in the mother's mouth for several more days. Then they are allowed to leave their floating nursery for short periods of time. But until they are strong and able to protect themselves, the mother will open her mouth when danger threatens, and the little ones will scurry back into the safety of their mother's mouth. But of course, each day they grow bigger until one day the faithful mother mouth breeder must let her little ones go to face life on their own.
Boy, that's terrific. You know, you learn something new every day, huh?
Well, you do if you keep your eyes and ears and mind open and really want to learn something.
I have an idea. Why don't we start an aquarium of our own? That's a good idea. Hey, yeah, let's. Wait a minute. What are we going to use for fish?
You know, kid, you don't have to have unusual fish from strange, faraway places to start an aquarium. In fact, you know, all of the common, ordinary creatures that live right here around us are very fascinating to study and observe. How they are made and the way they live and reproduce. And you know, even those little minnows you can catch down in the creek make very interesting pets.
They do? Great. Let's go. I got a minnow net we can use. We can get some little rocks and plants from the creek.
That's good, because those little plants are very important to a balanced aquarium. In fact, I tell you what you kids do. After you've caught your little fish, you come on back here and let me show you how to set up your aquarium properly so your minnows will live.
Okay. Thanks, Uncle Bob. See you later.
So long, kids. Have fun.
May we please have a drink of water, Uncle Bob?
You certainly may. That's one thing I have plenty of. Help yourself.
Boy. I'm next.
All right, plenty for everybody.
I'm next.
Well, what's this, the seventh inning stretch?
No, we were just practicing. Boy, this water sure tastes good. Boy, nothing like water when you're thirsty.
Oh, you're so right, Mike. You know, man can add all sorts of things to water to make it taste differently and have pretty colors. But when you're really thirsty, boy, you'll choose just plain old water. Say, by the way, do you fellas know what water's made of?
What do you mean, made of? You mean water's made out of something else?
Yes, it is that. What do you think water is?
I always thought water was just water. Yeah, just plain H2O.
Ah, there you are, Ted. Okay, now what do you mean by just H2O?
I don't know. I guess it's sort of a nickname for water, isn't it?
I guess H2O has become sort of a slang expression meaning water. But actually, H2O is the chemical formula for water. But why do we use the letters H and O with a little 2 in the middle?
I don't know. Tell us, Uncle Bob.
All right, I will. Come on into my lab for a few seconds, and we'll do some detective work and solve the mystery of why we call this H2O. I'm going to need a fresh supply of Exhibit A. Go ahead in, fellas. All right, now you fellas just gather around the bench here while I go back and get the electrolysis equipment.
The what?
Electrolysis equipment, Ted. That's what we call this glass apparatus that we're going to use to perform the experiment. Now, I'll need some power. Bobby, in over by the radios on the back shelf, you'll find a Super B battery. It has some leads attached to the top terminals. Would you get it for me, please?
Yes, sir.
Now, I'll add some more water. There.
You want, Bob?
Yeah, that's it, Bobby. Fine, thank you. Okay, now, fellas, I want you to watch these little platinum electrodes in here very, very closely. Because when I attach the battery, the current will flow through the water, and you'll see something very, very special start to happen.
Look at the bubbles. Yeah, look at them.
Right. Little bubbles are starting to form.
Where's the bubbles come from?
Aha. That is one of the wonderful secrets about water that we'll soon find out. Now, notice that the water level is going down in the tubes. As the bubbles continue to appear, the water disappears. Now, what do you suppose that means? Well, this may come as a big surprise to you, but the electric current running through the water is breaking the water down into the two things from which it's made. In other words, the water is being taken apart, and we're left with the two elements which used to be the water, two gases. Now, the bubbles of one gas collect in the top of this tube, and the bubbles of the other gas collect over here. So you see, fellas, water is really just a combination of two different gases.
Wow. Two gases. What is this couple of gases that are put together?
Right, Bobby, that's it. But those gases must be put together in just exactly the right proportion. Now look at these tubes again. Do you notice any difference between them?
Yeah, there's more water in one tube than there is in the other.
Right you are, Ted. That means there's more gas forming in the top of this tube. And you'll notice there's twice as much gas in this tube as there is in the other one.
But how do you know which gas is which?
Well, that's a good question, Milton. Let's make a few tests, huh? Now, first of all, we'll let the gas out of this tube and see what happens. There, you see how that burns with a light blue flame?
Yeah.
You have to look pretty closely because it's invisible. Well, we know that hydrogen burns with an almost invisible blue flame. Therefore, this is hydrogen. All right, now let's test the gas in the other tube. There. You see how that spark on the end of this piece of wood burst into flame and burns very fast?
Yeah.
That's because that spark has come in contact with oxygen. Now, oxygen itself doesn't burn. However, it enables other things to burn. So, by this experiment, we know that water is made up of two gases, hydrogen and oxygen. Now, the chemical symbol for hydrogen is the letter H. And to represent oxygen, the letter O is used.
Well, we call it H2O. What does the little 2 mean?
All right, remember that we decided that there was twice as much of one gas as there is of the other? Do you remember which one?
Well, this would have twice as much gas in it.
Uh-huh. And do you remember what happened with this tube?
Well, this tube had a blue flame on the top.
Right.
Hydrogen.
Hydrogen, right.
Yeah.
Twice as much hydrogen as there is oxygen. And in order to represent that in our chemical formula, we use the little number 2. H2O. In other words, 2 parts of hydrogen combining with 1 part of oxygen makes up the wonderful substance we know as water.
How about that? We use water to put out fire, but it's made from two gases which burn like crazy.
Well, almost, Mike. Remember that oxygen just helps other things burn. No, water is a very remarkable liquid. All life depends on it. And you know, water is a wonderful example of the Creator's great wisdom and careful planning. And the ways in which our water supplies are regulated and maintained is another remarkable story. You see, about 3/4 of the entire surface of the earth is covered with water. The rivers and the lakes and the oceans and the streams. But as you know, the snowflakes and the raindrops that are formed in the clouds above the earth are formed from water that is in the air. Rising from the surface of the oceans and lakes and rivers and streams are tiny particles of water, which usually are so small that you can't see them. Water in this form is called vapor. And the process by which water changes from a liquid to vapor is known as evaporation. Sometimes, however, this water in the air can be seen. And these particles are now droplets of mist. But whether you can see it or not, there is always water in the air. And under the right conditions, the water vapor will turn into a liquid. You can see evidence of this on a blade of grass or the petals of a flower. It all depends on the temperature and the amount of water in the air. The process of changing vapor to liquid is called condensation. The same thing is happening up in the sky when the clouds form. As the warm, moist air rises, it begins to cool, and the water vapor in the air condenses into little drops of water. As the wind moves the clouds along, the drops of water grow bigger until they become too heavy to stay in the air any longer, and down they come as raindrops. Or, when the conditions are just right, snowflakes are formed which fall silently to the earth, where they remain until the warm rays of the sun cause the snow to melt. Little drops of water form rivulets, and the water pours into streams that go rushing and tumbling down the hillside. Finally, the water is sent splashing into irrigation ditches where it bubbles out to soak deeply into the ground. Here it is taken in by the roots of thirsty plants, plants that bring forth blossoms and fruit of every kind. The water freshens the barren earth, changing it into a land of plenty. Another way in which water serves our need is power. In olden times, water was used to turn water wheels to grind the grain and cut the lumber. Today, the old water wheel is gone, but the power is still there, turning modern water wheels, the huge turbo generators that change that water power into electrical energy. Energy sent along wires to places where man puts it to work in thousands of different ways every day. And when the day is over, the power from the water lights our homes and our cities.
You know, I never thought about water that way before. Neither did I. I just drank it and forgot it.
Yes, I guess most of us never stop to realize what God has done for us by giving us water. We don't appreciate how much this common, ordinary substance means to us. We're so used to it, we just take it for granted. But it helps grow the food we eat. It provides electricity and steam for power. We use it to keep things clean. We boil things in it to sterilize them and prevent disease. We drink it. We skate on it. And we swim in it. We make snowballs out of it. We use it for cooking. And we keep things cold with it. Yes, water is essential to all life. Without it, there would be no grass or trees or any living thing. For without water, you and I wouldn't be alive right now. You know, it makes a person feel very, very grateful for water. Two colorless, tasteless, odorless, invisible gases combined in just exactly the right way to give us this wonderful, life-giving liquid. Just plain old
H2O.
A pleasant memory is all that remains of a world with 1 or 2 horsepower. Old Dobbin would find himself quite out of place on a fast and crowded highway. The iron horse was a modern marvel when Grandmother was a girl, but now... Today, cameras and rockets 100 miles above the Earth are giving us a glimpse of what the passenger of tomorrow may consider commonplace. Well, this certainly is an age of progress, isn't it? There's been more of scientific discovery, more of technical advancement and material progress in your lifetime and mine than in all the ages of history. Invention has become the symbol of the age. And the mousetrap could well be the symbol of invention. What father hasn't said to his offspring, son, build a better mousetrap and the world will be the pathway to your door? And the sons have been busy doing just that, thinking, planning, working, and they've built their better mousetraps. For man has discovered a lot of things. And yet, perhaps the most embarrassing discovery is the fact that regardless of what man may invent or devise, nature had it first. Traps? Why, there are literally millions of them. Far more wonderful and complex than anything man has ever thought of. The similarity between a Venus flytrap and a bear trap is quite remarkable, isn't it? The general appearance, the teeth, the action. Now, the bear trap has a trigger right there. And if that trigger is pushed... Now, the Venus flytrap has a trigger also. In fact, it has 6 of them. 3 on each side. But there's a difference. The bear trap doesn't know a bear from a piece of wood, but the Venus flytrap does. You see, to touch the trigger hair just once is not enough. Nothing happens. But if we touch the trigger hairs more than once, and at just the right intervals, the trap is sprung. You see, no energy is wasted on a twig or a leaf that might fall into the trap. But even more amazing is how those trigger hairs work. There is actually a flow of electrical current from those tiny trigger hairs to the apex of the plant. And when anything touches them, the flow of current is interrupted. A correct number of these negative impulses will cause the trap to spring. If the insect struggles to get away, more pulses cause the trap to close even tighter. Man may have thought he built a better mousetrap, but he's never built one like this. Why, the trap is also a stomach. The animal will soon be digested by the plant, and in a few days, the Venus flytrap will be open for business again. Now, that action of the jaws snapping shut, it can take place in a 25th of a second. It can even catch flies. And yet the plant is completely devoid of muscle tissue. That flow of electric current, we know it's there. And yet the plant has no nervous system. How does it happen? Someday we'll know. The plant life of North America's bogs and swamps reveals that a master craftsman has laid out with intricate design a variety of traps to serve the needs of nature. Some of the traps are passive. The trumpet plant, for example, is a type of pitfall. It's composed of a long, slender tube which will average from 18 to 24 inches in length. Down inside the tube are tiny glands that produce a nectar, and the nectar serves to attract the insects. The cobra plant is another type of pitfall, and like all the others, it may be passive, but it's very effective. The hood of the plant is a maze of tiny windows. These appear to the trapped insects to be a way of escape. In a frustrated attempt for freedom, a false step usually occurs, and the insect adds to the daily mineral requirements of a carnivorous plant. Yet another type of pitfall is the pitcher plant. The shape of the leaves is responsible for its name. The leaves actually grow in such a manner that they form pitchers. Pitchers that are 6 to 8 inches deep and as much as 1 to 2 inches wide. Most of the pitfalls simply allow the prey to follow the line of least resistance. Getting out, however, is an entirely different matter. The tiny hairs on the welcome mat suddenly become spears that surround a prison. When an insect topples in, a pool of death awaits below. The liquid will put him to sleep and then digest him. The traps always eat what they catch. Beautiful, isn't it? But these are not flowers. They're leaves of the sundew plant, nature's own brand of flypaper, and they're covered with bright red hairs. The glands that manufacture the sticky secretion are located at the ends of these hairs, and it is through these same glands that the food is assimilated by the body of the plant. Talk about your traps. This is a working model of one of the most fantastic traps ever built. Now the prey approaches, triggers the mechanism, this trap even resets itself. Now, can you imagine building all of this complicated mechanism into a trap the size of the head of this pin? God did it. The plant itself, the utricularia, lives beneath the surface of the water. Each of the small globular objects is a trap, much more complicated than our working model. The trap itself is so tiny that it will take a microscope to see it work. But if we're fortunate, we can actually see the plant trap tiny animals. Notice the guide hairs and the 3 small trigger hairs. Now, don't blink your eyes. You're liable to miss the catch. This little animal doesn't know which way to go, and he's just the kind of a fellow utricularia likes to have around. Did you see it? Well, I told you not to blink. You see, the catch is actually made in a 50th of a second. Now watch closely this time. When the trigger hairs are bent, the trap is sprung. And when an animal gets sucked inside, eventually he succumbs and is digested. Even the utricularia sometimes overeats. When we see such a complex mechanism as this, and remember it's no larger than the head of a pin, man's best traps look strangely cold and ineffective by comparison. Man's progress has not been due to discovery of new things, but merely to the uncovering of principles and devices that God ordained in nature.
right, Jack. Go ahead. All right, you mark him where he lands, Ross, and I'll measure the distance. Oh, about 5 feet. That's a pretty good standing broad jump, boy. But you know, if you'd been this little grasshopper you brought in, you would have been able to jump almost 100 feet.
100 feet? How come?
Because this 20 times its length. Now, you said you were about 5 feet tall, right? Well, 5 times 20 equals 100.
100 feet? Man, oh, man. That means you could jump the length of our football field in just 3 jumps.
Right. That's pretty fast figuring, Ross. You must be sharp at math. Huh?
20 times its length. How can he jump like that, Uncle Bob?
Well, let's see if we can take a close look at these 2 hind legs of his. If I can get them out. Come on. Oh, I'm not going to hurt you now. Okay, there we are. Now then, for its weight, this muscle has the capacity to develop 10 times the power of the strongest man running at top speed.
No wonder we had such a hard time catching him.
Yeah, seems like we chased that thing for miles.
Well, don't feel too bad, fellas. You're not the only ones. For thousands of years, men all over the world have had a real fight to control these insects. You see, there's a very definite and delicate balance in nature. And whenever we allow it to become unbalanced, then there's trouble. Now, if we don't control these grasshoppers properly, they swarm all over the countryside, eating everything in their path. The financial loss amounts to millions of dollars as they destroy crops, gardens, and our country. In order to fight these plagues of hoppers, many different methods of control are used. Burning them out, dusting the infested areas by airplane, and spraying chemicals on the crops. Mixing tons of poison, which is spread on the crops by especially designed machines. Now, all of this takes a lot of people, a lot of time, and costs millions of dollars.
Boy, there must be a lot of grasshoppers in this world.
There are a lot of them.
Are all grasshoppers just alike?
Well, they are all quite similar. Come on to my lab, and I'll show you some specimens I've collected. Oh, wait a second. Better turn off this tube checker. I still haven't found the trouble with Harry Jackson's radio yet. Back up this way, fellas. There. Take a look at those.
Wow, look at those. And I thought the one we caught was big.
Yes. This is the largest species of grasshopper and perhaps the most handsome of them all. It's called the lubber grasshopper. And even though this one has wings, it can't fly because its body is too heavy.
You said grasshoppers were all alike. They all look different to me.
Well, even though there are many differences in size and coloring among them, all grasshoppers are basically alike. You see, the grasshopper is an insect, and like all insects, it has 3 distinct body parts: the head, the thorax, and the abdomen. It has 3 pair of legs and 2 sets of wings. Now, grasshoppers wear their skeleton on the outside instead of the inside. Because they don't have any bones inside their body like we humans have, the grasshopper wears a very specially constructed suit of armor called an exoskeleton. This special covering gives rigidity to the body and protects the soft inner parts. These hard plates are much like the shell of a crab or lobster, and they are held together by flexible membranes that allow movement of the body and legs.
He really has big eyes, too, hasn't he?
Oh, yes, indeed. And these are very special eyes that enable the hopper to see forward, backward, and sidewards. But here on the tip end of the female's abdomen is one of the most perfectly designed little digging tools you'll find anywhere. It's called an ovipositor and is made up of 4 hard, movable prongs which function like a miniature scoop shovel when the female is preparing to lay her eggs.
Eggs? You mean grasshoppers lay eggs just like birds do?
Well, not quite like the birds do. At least they don't have the same kind of nest. Where do you suppose the mother grasshopper builds her nest?
On one of the plants?
No. You see, the eggs have to be protected for 7 or 8 months before they hatch. And if they were laid on a plant or on top of the ground, they probably wouldn't last that long. Animals and birds in the weather might destroy the eggs long before they hatch. So if you were a grasshopper and wanted to make sure that your eggs would be safe, where would you put them?
I don't know. I think I'd try and bury them.
Right, and that's just what Mrs. Grasshopper does. She buries her eggs in the ground.
Boy, that would be a neat trick. How does she do it?
Remember this little digging tool that I told you about, the ovipositor? With this, she digs down into the ground, making a tunnel in the earth. Usually, she'll lay her eggs near a healthy plant, so the babies will have some good food to eat when they emerge from the ground the following spring. With her ovipositor operating like an automatic post hole digger, she burrows into the earth, stretching her abdomen 2 or 3 times its normal length as she forces it down into the tunnel. Now, buried several inches into the dark, rich soil, the valves of the ovipositor open, and the egg-laying begins. The eggs, which are about the size of large grains of rice, are enveloped in a sticky substance, and when all the eggs are laid, they are covered with a final coat of this liquid glue, which quickly hardens and binds the eggs together to protect them during their long stay in the soil. When the female has finished laying her eggs, she withdraws the ovipositor, leaving this mass of eggs. Each group holds from 25 to 60 eggs, and the female will lay several such batches in a season. Still buried in the underground nest, the baby grasshopper, which is called a nymph, grows and develops inside the egg until the time comes when it finally breaks the eggshell. However, it is still wrapped in a cellophane-like bag that holds the legs and feelers tightly against the body. But despite this handicap, through the soil, and even if the egg pod has been covered with several inches of drifting dirt, the nymph usually digs out all right. Immediately upon reaching the surface, the young hopper sheds the baby clothes that have hindered its movements, but have protected its soft body during the struggle upward through the earth, and the baby walk, jump, and eat. Once the trail has been broken by the first nymph, the rest of them follow right along. At first, the nymph is fairly light in color, but after several hours in the sunlight, it turns rather black and has a definite yellow stripe down its back. The newly hatched baby closely resembles its parents, except for its color and lack of wings. The grasshopper's final suit of clothes is yellow with black markings and comes complete with wings.
What do you mean, final suit of clothes?
Well, as the hopper grows older, it outgrows its clothes just like you fellas do. You see, there's a great difference in size between the baby and the adult grasshopper. When it is first hatched, the baby is less than half an inch long. But when it is fully grown, it may be over 4 inches in length. And it takes a heap of growing in just 2 short months to accomplish this. And so the grasshopper goes through a series of changes by growing new body coverings and shedding the old ones. This process is called molting. And each time the grasshopper wriggles out of its old skin, it emerges a little larger than before. Then, because of a terrific appetite, it stuffs itself with food and continues to grow very rapidly. Then, during the warmth of early summer, the time comes for the final molt. Everything is done as before, only this time the results are different. The hopper will rest up for a day before starting the molt. Then it will find a good sturdy place on the plant and secure its feet so it won't fall during the changing time. When it is tightly fastened, the grasshopper nymph will begin to squirm and jerk as it struggles to get out of the covering that has become too small. Suddenly, the skin splits open, and the thorax and head start to emerge. In a few minutes, complete with eyes and feelers, the head and thorax are free. As the struggle continues, the front pair of legs appear from inside the old covering. And not only has its color changed, but this time something new has been added. For the first time, delicate wings are attached to its back. When the front 2 pair of legs are freed, the grasshopper is hanging only by its hind legs and tail, which are still in the shell that's fastened to the plant. Finally, the insect pulls its hind legs loose and scrambles madly for the branch as it jerks out its tail, completely free from the old hollow shell that contained this beautiful insect just a couple of hours before. Then this fully grown grasshopper with its new buff yellow suit with interesting black markings and red wings will sit around for a couple of days waiting for the external parts of its body to harden so it can safely continue to carry on its own particular way of life. Yes, with its marvelously made ovipositor, its shiny armor, the tough protective exoskeleton, powerful hind legs, lovely red wings, extraordinary eyes, and sensitive antennae, the lubber grasshopper is truly a striking example of the great skill of the master designer.
You know, I never thought about grasshoppers like that before.
They really are terrific little animals, huh?
Hello there. A hearty welcome to Moody Institute of Science. For several years here at the laboratory, we've been studying the human senses. And the deeper we go into the subject, the more fascinating and wonderful it becomes. As we explore the mysteries of sense perception together, we're going to have a lot of fun. There'll be some surprises and quite a few chuckles. But also, we're going to discover that there is real significance in the study. How many senses are there? Well, more than the traditional 5. A lot more. But it's not without reason that these 5 have been called the windows of the soul. The sense of sight, which opens to us all the beauty and wonder of the world around us. Sense of hearing and the many voices of the world. The sense of taste with its endless delights. Oh yes, and that wonderful sense of smell. The sense of touch, with hands both young and old. Viewing the senses individually, we find that they are wonderful indeed. But our senses don't function independently. They operate together as a team, forming a smoothly integrated, complex electronic system. Let's watch this system work at a baseball game. Nice catch. But let's take a closer look at the electronic magic behind that catch. At the instant the ball was hit, countless bits of information were flashed to the outfielder's brain. His eyes told him the angle at which the bat hit the ball and the direction it was starting to travel. His ears told him how squarely and how hard the ball was hit. His sense of touch gave him clues as to wind direction and velocity. And from his memory came thousands of clues gained through past experience. This information was combined to solve a complex problem involving geometry, trigonometry, calculus, and ballistics. And he makes the catch. In a single day of normal activity, it is probable that the sensory system of your body will handle more messages than have been carried by all the telephone and telegraph lines in the whole world during the past 50 years. The human senses are wonderful, and they serve their intended purpose as well. But for the world around us, they are extremely limited. Let's take the sense of sight, for example. Now, our eyes are sensitive to a particular range of frequencies, which we call visible light. But visible light is merely a small part of the electromagnetic spectrum, which includes electric waves, radio waves, infrared, ultraviolet, X-rays, gamma, and cosmic rays. Now, in a very real sense, all of this is light, but nearly all of it is light we cannot see. These frequencies have special meaning for us merely because they are the ones to which our eyes will respond. Now, of course, electric waves and radio waves have different properties because they're different wavelengths. But that same thing is true of any part of the spectrum. Even in the visible spectrum, there are different wavelengths which have different properties. In the electromagnetic spectrum, the longest waves are the electric waves, which commonly supply us with power. Electric waves are some 3,000 miles in length. But as they become shorter and vibrate faster, they gradually merge into radio waves. The longer radio waves we pick up on our standard broadcast receivers. For shorter waves, we have to use shortwave receivers, television sets, various radar systems. But as the waves become shorter and vibrate still faster, we move into the infrared section. These waves cannot be tuned in on our radio or TV sets. Instead, we tune them in on our bodies and call them heat. Wavelengths of invisible infrared light are so close to the longest waves of visible light that often both can be detected at the same time. Moving across the visible spectrum, the waves become shorter and vibrate faster until finally visible violet disappears into invisible ultraviolet, sometimes called black light. Now, ultraviolet rays are too short and vibrate too fast for the human eye to see, but there are ways we can see their effects. Sunburn, for instance, is caused by invisible ultraviolet light. Some minerals can change invisible ultraviolet light into frequencies we can see. Rather ordinary looking, aren't they? Well, now let's shine some invisible ultraviolet light on them. Instantly, they flame into glowing beauty as short waves of invisible ultraviolet light are sent back as longer waves, which we can see. Traveling farther down the spectrum, we come to X-rays. Now, of course, our eyes are not sensitive to X-ray light, but photographic film is, a fact made use of every day in medical laboratories. So, in reality, we who think we see so much are groping around in a world ablaze with glory and wonder and light and color, and we're almost totally blind. Now, does this mean that our sense of sight is any less amazing and wonderful than we had supposed? Not at all. It merely means that the universe around us is infinitely more wonderful than anything of which we've ever dreamed. Now, all of us have heard someone say, "I will not believe in anything that I cannot see with my own two eyes." Well, the very least that you can say about such a person is that he must have a narrow view of the world around him. Yes, our vision certainly is limited. But how about the sense of hearing? Is it also limited? Well, did you ever hear one of these? Quiet, isn't it? No, not really. This is an ultrasonic dog whistle. Actually, the sound is very loud. A dog can hear it all over the neighborhood. But it's beyond the range of the human ear. Now, we've built a super high-powered dog whistle. In the science laboratory, it's called a Galton whistle, after Sir Francis Galton, who invented it. The whistle is now blowing full blast. Though completely inaudible to us, it is of tremendous intensity. In fact, it is so loud that the sound can actually be used to support objects in midair. The silent sound from the whistle is bounced back and forth to form a standing wave pattern. These waves whip the air molecules into a stormy sea of violent motion, except at 2 points in each wave. It's at these points, or nodes, that the cork chips are suspended. This world of silent sound brings man face to face with a realm far beyond the narrow limits of the human senses. Now, before the molecular nature of matter was known, the sense of smell and, to a lesser degree, that of taste were almost a complete mystery. Knowledge, however, has not lessened the wonder of these so-called chemical senses. It has merely enabled us in some small degree to appreciate their wonder. Now, any substance is composed of invisible particles called molecules. These particles are in continuous movement. In some substances, the movement is so violent that particles near the surface go shooting off into the air. This is what gives a substance an odor. Dramatic proof of this may be had by pouring some mercury into a dish. And then carefully sprinkling the surface of the mercury with a fine powder. Now, if we bring a substance with a strong odor close to the surface of the tub, the powder will be pushed violently away by the invisible particles coming from the substance. A man has devised instruments so sensitive that they can detect one part of a substance in 10 million parts of air. Your olfactory organs, however, can detect one part in 1,000 million. But compared to that of many animals, man's sense of smell is quite limited. The bloodhound, for instance, has the extraordinary ability to follow a scent when it's hours or even days old. But perhaps the most limited sense of all is the sense of taste. Yes, even the man who prides himself on a very discriminating sense of taste is limited, like the rest of us, to just 4 kinds of taste buds: salt, sweet, sour, and bitter. Did you know that if a person is blindfolded, with his nasal passages completely blocked, he can't tell the difference between an onion, an apple, a pear, or a potato? It's a fact. It's only the odor that makes the flavor different. As we began our study of the mysteries of sense perception, one of the first things we had to recognize is the fact that we do not see with our eyes or hear with our ears. These are merely the external receptors. The real seat of sense perception is in the brain. It is here that we see and hear and detect odors and taste our food and otherwise sense the world around us. And it's a good thing that this is so. For example, if seeing were done only in the eye, everything would be upside down to us. The eye is actually a miniature camera. Just as in a camera, the lens of the eye forms the image upside down. The image is then inverted by the brain so that it appears right side up. Now, what would happen if a lens system were used to form the image right side up? Well, the brain would immediately invert the image so that it would be upside down. But would this condition be permanent? To answer this question, we asked Mr. Gratz, our optical expert, to design for us a pair of inverting spectacles. While the spectacles were being constructed in our shop, we faced the problem of who was going to wear the things continuously for several weeks. So we decided to have an election. And now, you'll want to meet our unlucky winner. That's right, me. Even from the first, it was possible to walk in this topsy-turvy fashion, but it didn't take long to develop a rollicking case of seasickness. We decided that for your sake as well as ours, we'd better conduct our first test sitting down. However, just sitting down wasn't so easy. Even the simplest tasks were at first impossible. No amount of concentration or effort could overcome the compulsion to reach in the wrong direction. The inverting spectacles had to be worn every waking moment during the entire period of the experiment. Anytime the glasses were removed, the eyes were closed or fully covered. Walking to work upside down was an exhausting experience, but it provided a valuable period of relearning and reorientation. It also caused quite a stir in the neighborhood. Gradually, it became easier to get around in this upside-down world. By a slow and painful process, the image in the brain had been erected. At this point, we decided to devise a convincing demonstration showing that reorientation had been achieved. The test with the motorcycle went so well that we decided to extend the experiment to flying an airplane, where visual coordination and depth perception are even more critical. The flight lasted more than an hour, during which all normal flight maneuvers were executed. In performing the experiment with the inverting spectacles, we became very much aware of how important it is that seeing is done in the brain, not just in the eye. When you look at a brick wall, for example, staring straight ahead with one eye closed, there is a hole in the picture image sent to your brain. The hole is irregular in shape and occurs 12 degrees to one side. However, try as you will, you won't be able to see the hole. Your mind will fill in the missing detail brick by brick. But why is the blind spot there in the first place? The answer lies in the amazing construction of the eye. The inner curved surface at the rear of the eye, called the retina, is a fantastic thing. Its function is to transform a visual image into electrical impulses which are collected by a network of more than 1 million tiny nerve lines, which carry the visual image to the brain. The blind spot occurs at that point in the retina where the nerve lines join the optic nerve. At this point, there are no seeing elements. Now, it's a good thing that this spot is not in the center of the retina, for if it were, our vision would have been seriously impaired. As it is, however, the hole is always there in the image sent to the brain, but the brain always fills in the hole with detail similar to that which surrounds it. But someone says, well, maybe I don't see everything around me. But if what I do see, I see correctly, I'll still trust my senses. Well, recently there's been a great deal of careful research and study into the subject of the accuracy of the senses, and the results have been quite amazing. The scientist, Adelbert Ames, has developed some ingenious experiments. In this figure, the two ends obviously are parallel, but the two sides are not parallel because the two ends are not the same length. This figure we call a trapezoid. Now let's remove the cover. Are you a bit confused? Well, all we've done is cut some holes in the figure and painted it to look like a window frame. But maybe you say, well, you can't fool me. That's still a trapezoid. Well, it's still a trapezoid, all right. But now let's revolve the figure and see what happens. Does the window frame seem to turn, then stop, and reverse direction? Well, such is not the case. It is revolving continuously in a clockwise direction. Now, even when we know this, the illusion still persists, and it looks more like a window all the time. Well, maybe you need a reference point. See if the cube will help you follow the edge of the trapezoid all the way around. Watch closely now. Doesn't help a bit, does it? Not only does the trapezoid still oscillate back and forth, but the cube actually seems to take off and go floating through space. Now, it doesn't, of course. Actually, the cube has been firmly attached to the edge of the figure all the time. Now, an iron bar should make a good solid reference point. Let's see what happens now when we rotate the window. Of course, we know that the revolving window frame cannot possibly bend the iron bar or cause it to cut through the window frame. But this knowledge seems to be of no help at all. The illusion of an oscillating window still continues. From earliest childhood, it has been our experience that windows are rectangles and that all sides are parallel. Your eye sent an accurate image to the brain, the image of a trapezoid painted like a window. But your mind said, that's a window. And rather than give up the idea that all windows are rectangular, your mind accepted all sorts of improbable things, solid bars bending or cutting through solid matter without even leaving a hole. We emphasize the fact that seeing is done in the mind, not just the eye. And I think you're beginning to see the importance of this emphasis. But Adelbert Ames had some other experiments which were most revealing. Now, as I step into this room, it should be quite obvious that something is wrong, but can you figure out what it is? Your mind may tell you that I have grown smaller. Of course, you know that that really isn't true. Your eyes, however, are telling you the truth. They're telling you that the floor is tilted up, that the ceiling is tilted down, that the walls are badly distorted, that the windows would be almost impossible to make drapes for them. Yes, your eye is telling you all this, but your mind simply refuses to believe it. But maybe this will help. Imagine all of this without benefit of vitamins. But it also works the other way, too. Now, if you'll just step back a bit, you'll see the real cause of the trouble. It's quite obvious at this distance, isn't it? Sloping floor, tilted ceiling, distorted walls. But since you understand this, you shouldn't have a bit of trouble from now on, should you? Or should you? In this house, faces at the window seem to come in assorted sizes, don't they? But there's nothing wrong with the faces. It's those windows and what they're doing to your brain, remember? A small one and a tall one. Let's see if we can even things out a bit. Oh, no, that's even worse. It comes as a distinct shock to most people when they realize how limited and how inaccurate the human senses really are. Now, of course, the scientist is keenly aware of these limitations. In fact, this awareness is the very foundation of modern science. Before the age of science, man had no real concept of an orderly universe governed by unchanging law. He proudly built his theories and philosophies on the meager scraps of information coming from his limited and inaccurate senses. This was a time when alchemists mixed their magic potions, when astrologers tried to predict the future, when phrenologists measured bumps on the head to gauge a man's intelligence. But about 300 years ago, the picture began to change. The age of science was born when man quit trusting his senses and developed instruments to overcome their limitations. Today, man knows that the physical world is governed by universal and unchanging law that has been operating since time began. Man knows that there is rich reward for strict, detailed obedience to physical law, and also a stern penalty for disobedience. He knows that sincerity and good intentions are not enough. Now, this attitude in the scientific realm is relatively new, but it certainly has paid off. As soon as man adopted this attitude, there was a sharp upturn, literally an explosion in scientific progress. And yet, with all the potential for good, this scientific development has brought man face to face with the greatest crisis in human history. And why do we face this crisis? Is it because scientific knowledge has grown too rapidly and too extensively? No, not at all. Obviously, scientific advancement must continue. It would be both foolish and dangerous to lag behind. And yet it would be far more foolish and dangerous to lag behind in our capacity to use this knowledge wisely. We must develop a sense of moral and spiritual responsibility so that the fruits of scientific progress may be devoted to life instead of death. Now, if man is to survive, man must change. In other words, there must be a moral and spiritual breakthrough, every bit as revolutionary as the one we've experienced in science. And I'd like to suggest that such a breakthrough is entirely possible, and that both the problem and the solution have a definite parallel in the history of science. Now, for thousands of years, there was virtually no scientific progress. And then suddenly, something happened. There was literally an explosion in scientific development, and the curve is getting steeper all the time. But what caused this change? Well, obviously, the physical universe didn't change suddenly. And we can't explain the situation by saying that man is smarter now than he was then. His IQ is probably very much the same. There was, however, a very basic change in man's attitude. During this period, man was committed to trusting his senses. And the result? Virtually no scientific progress. But then man woke up. He began to search out the laws of the physical universe. And as fast as he discovered them, he obeyed them. He accepted their restraint and their discipline. And for the first time in history, he was free. Free from bondage to ignorance and superstition and unworkable philosophies and theories. And the result? An explosive progress. But how about the moral and spiritual realm? In this realm, man seems to feel that there are no absolute values and no fixed laws, so once again he is committed to trusting himself, his own ideas, his own theories and philosophies. And what's the result? Virtually no progress. Now, judging from our experience in the scientific world, it would seem that once again we're on the wrong track. But let's suppose that the young people of today recognize the need for a breakthrough in this, the most important realm of all. Let us suppose that they recognize the existence of absolute values and fixed laws, and that they set themselves to obeying those laws with all of the dedication and the honesty and the energy which they bring to the scientific task. What will be the result? An explosive change. A surge in moral and spiritual strength to match our progress in science and to give meaning and purpose to our lives.